All right, I have my devices rolling, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Anthony. Good evening, and welcome to the regularly scheduled meeting of the Morro Bay Planning Commission. It is Tuesday, September 21st, 6 o'clock, and we have all current members in attendance. The meeting is being held via Zoom, and we do have a quorum. We are called to order. We will start with a moment of silence. All right, moving on to Planning Commissioner announcements. Does anybody have anything they need to share at this time? No from Bill, no from Joe. I have one thing, and I did ask permission to read it. Jen Ford sent us all an email just to let the public know in case they didn't. She has been appointed to be the most recent council member, and her email is as follows. Dear Planning Commissioners, I enjoyed my time on the Planning Commission and getting to work with you along with our city staff. It may have been brief, but I learned so much from all of you. I appreciate your dedication to the betterment of our community. Even though I no longer sit on the PC, I'm still around as your neighbor and council member. I'm available if needed. However, your council liaison is outstanding, and I look forward to hearing more from Council Member Heller on the extraordinary work being done. I'll be tuning in regularly to see your smiling faces. Jen Ford, and we will miss her. She was a great addition to this group, but wish her all the best on the council. All right, no other comments, and we'll move on to the public comment period. And Scott, I realize we really haven't been posting the links for people to participate. Maybe we could do that.
I certainly can. I have it available. It's just haven't been asking me, so
I think most people have figured out how to do it, but we might go ahead and post. They can join via Zoom or by phone. So, Anthony, do we have anybody waiting for public comment on the open and general public comment period time?
Thank you, Chair Stewart. Yes, I do see a hand raised. Okay. Marty Travis. Okay, I am unmuting you. Marty, you should be unmuted. Marty, are you there? I have unmuted you. There you go.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Is this the time to speak, Susan? Or
I was going to suggest if Marty, since it's Marty Travis, probably waiting until the public hearing, if you can stay on for that, would be great, because that'll be the first thing on our agenda after our consent.
Okay.
Agenda, so.
And it'll be Mark. I'll leave it.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Marty. All right. Anybody else wishing to speak on any items not on the agenda, or if you have to speak now and leave, this would be the time.
Oh, thank you, Chair Stewart. I do not see any raised hands left in the queue.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And we have no presentations, so we will move on to the consent agenda. We have 4 items on there: the current and advanced planning processing list, and minutes from May 18th, June 1st, and July 6th. Anybody have any comments or need to pull anything from those? I had one item on, this would be the July 6th minutes. I was actually encouraging the public to apply for the position that I thought I would be stepping down from, rather than other commissioners, since they're already there. So just a minor correction in the minutes.
Okay.
Otherwise, looking for a motion to approve. Let's see, Mike, you've got your hand up?
Yes, sure. I received email, I believe, with the rest of us from Councilmember Heller, asking commissions to go ahead and create subcommittees if they felt like this was something that would be productive for their goals and objectives as a commission. So I just wanted to note in some of our minutes, I was trying to locate where we established our subcommittee to deal with public benefits. I'd like that to be strictly noted in either the June 1st, I believe, or July 6th. But he kind of, egged me on a little there because we did establish a subcommittee for public benefits. So it's not noted in the minutes. So I'd like to see it.
Commissioner Rodriguez, it is in the minutes.
Sure. Which one? Which minutes?
I have to go back and look, but it's in the minutes.
Because I
actually looked at it about a week ago.
Okay, because I reviewed the June 1st and the July 6th, and I didn't see that there was a motion to create the subcommittee and a second. That way,
it's in there.
I didn't see it, so
okay. I will send it to the entire commission so you can see it. Okay.
Again, sure. That's for the benefit of Councilmember Heller, who said create these committees, especially if it's a benefit to the commission. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Mike. All right, do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda? Thanks, Bill. You want to make a motion or just move? You're muted still.
I just moved to, accept the consensus agenda.
Second.
All right. Okay, thank you. We have a motion and a second. I guess we should call the roll here.
Sure. Vice Chair Roshan?
Yes.
Commissioner Rodriguez?
Yes.
Commissioner Ingraffia?
Yes.
Chairperson Stewart?
Yes.
Motion passes 4-0. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to public hearings, we have item B1, 715 Embarcadero, and Cindy, take it away.
Thank you. Good evening, Planning Commission. This item is a conditional use permit amendment for a major modification at 715 Embarcadero Road. The applicant is Paul and Leon Van Vuurden with Kathy Novak Consulting as the agent. And this is an application for public access improvements. It proposes conversion of fishing wharf to new harbor walk, public access improvements, conversion of the existing interior space to retail, public outdoor dining, seating, and related facade improvements, which I will explain in my presentation. The image on the screen before you shows outlined in red the waterfront lease site location. This is lease sites 8081 and 80W81W. Oh, and I need to share my screen. I'm talking away as if you can see my screen, so I apologize for that. Got a little ahead of myself here. So I'm going to take a moment and share that. Okay, can you see the screen?
Yes.
Thank you. There we go. Now you can see the area outlined in red along the Embarcadero. Okay, the next slide. This is an image of the lease site. This is also the location of the Dolphin Shirt Company. And the Planning Commission may recall that this item was previously continued to a date uncertain at its July 20th Planning Commission hearing. At that time, the applicant had their project noticed for a public hearing for the major modification, and they requested a continuance in order to make plan revisions to the project. So those plans have been revised, and they are included as Exhibit E in your packet. At this existing site, along the rear of the building, there is an existing outdoor patio area with windscreen. You can see it here at the back of the building. That is proposed to be removed. At the northwest corner of the building, the applicant has an existing commercial fishing wharf that is proposed to be converted to public access, and approximately 445 square feet of that would be demolished of the existing 1,025 square feet. That also includes removal of existing wood pilings, installation of a new 10-foot wide Harbor Walk coastal public access, and an additional 10-foot wide fiberglass deck, removal of the 580 square foot outdoor covered patio that you can see here in this image, and then my cursor is pointing to, and also proposes 470 square feet of that existing interior fish processing area that would be converted to retail, a new 461 square feet of street-facing public outdoor seating, and related commercial facade improvements. And so that is what my presentation will go through. This is an area where there is no current bayside lateral access, also known as Harbor Walk access. The Harbor Walk was recently redone to the north, and it was expanded by the Roses Landing development, which you can see Roses Landing building and the right of this image. And so this project would provide that important connection to the north. The property is in the Waterfront zoning district. It is in a planned development overlay. The PD overlay is the PD overlay zone as a standard typically requires CUP approval by the Planning Commission. However, this is a major modification of a conditional use permit that was approved in 1992, which, in addition to the PD overlay requirements by PC, that 1992 permit had a condition in there that required this project go back to the Planning Commission if the fish processing use were to ever cease, and which it is proposed to do that in this application. The land use designation from the new general plan, local coastal plan, is waterfront commercial industrial, and you can see the land use map here at the top, and the zoning map is at the bottom. The property is also within the original jurisdiction of the California Coastal Commission, which has authority for the CDP. So the matter before the Planning Commission tonight is a review and modification of the conditional use permit only, and staff is recommending that Planning Commission forward a favorable recommendation to the City Council as a combined concept precise plan approval, and that is what is before you tonight. So a little bit more detail on the proposed development. I already spoke about this, but there are four main components with the application. The conversion of the commercial fishing wharf, the public access improvements, the interior changes, and public outdoor dining area. And I would note that the project CUP approval in 1992, there was an additional permit in 1997 that authorized retail use for that fish processing area that's noted in number 3 there. So, but this application would officially change that use, interior use, from fish processing to retail within the existing building. On this slide here, you are seeing some images of the site plan and highlighting the proposed public access. The image on the left, highlighted in orange, shows the area where the new Harbor Walk connection would be proposed. This area here on the left, there is some existing access area here, and this is the area where the patio covered enclosure would be removed. The area in orange would provide that Harbor Walk connection, and then below that is the new retail space from within the building. On the right side of the slide, you see the proposed public outdoor dining. It is approximately 470 square feet. It would be separated into 2 separate areas. Excuse me, sorry about that. Okay, and the proposed elevations for the project include updating the exterior facade. The applicant is proposing board and batten and cement shingle siding to replace the existing vertical corrugated metal siding. The roofing would also be changed to a galvanized metal with blue accents and gray shingle. The next few slides depict the visual simulation. So this is the existing facade as it was approved in the 1991 permit. It was actually 1992. And the proposed facade depicts that updated exterior facade. This is the proposed street view simulation. And then on the rear, you can see in the bottom picture where there is that gap in that Harbor Walk access, and then the applicant's proposal to fill in that connection. In the project, the resolution includes a recommended condition number 6 for the proposed railing design, that it, consistent with the downtown waterfront strategic plan, that it be proposed to have a cable railing style design so that it would match with the other waterfront lease sites recently approved. The applicant did not include a proposed visual simulation of what that outdoor dining would look like. I did include this image in the PowerPoint presentation. This shows what the previous outdoor dining setup looked like. As we all recall, last year during the COVID restaurant closures in response to the pandemic, many of the restaurants were shut down, and this lease site, the 701 Embarcadero, the Dutchman's lease site, did receive a temporary use permit from staff for outdoor dining. So this is what that looked like last year. The applicant's proposal before you today, though, is for public seating not associated with the restaurant use. This would be public seating, and it would maintain a minimum 10-foot wide vertical access view corridor. The tables and potted plants that you see in these images have since been removed, and the area is reduced in slide in size. And I do have a image of what that looks like today in a couple slides. Per the application requirements, the applicant has shown their color, materials, lighting, and proposed seating. And these are also denoted on the plan. Staff is recommending condition of approval be added to address table setups, that there be no table setups provided on the table to avoid any appearance that this is for private restaurant use, since these are proposed as public seating areas. And then Planning Commission 14 is to address view corridor height limits. The Waterfront Master Plan limits anything within the view corridor to no taller than 30 inches. And the applicant's proposal does include patio umbrellas, but they are not proposing that to be within that 10-foot wide view corridor. Planning Condition 7 includes a recommendation to address the non-conforming window signage that's at the building at this lease site. So as I stated previously, this building is the location of the Dolphin T-shirt company business. Our city sign ordinance does limit window signs to no more than 25% of window surface area. In this picture, you can see the non-conforming window signs, and so that Planning Condition 7 would be added to address that. This is a new slide that I added. It was not in the staff report, but I put together some thoughts on the public correspondence that the city received after publication of the staff report. And so what this is as noted in the agenda correspondence that was posted to the city website, we did receive correspondence from the business owners of Dolphin T-shirt Company that expressed some concerns regarding business visibility and any potential view blockages by the proposed outdoor dining. And I've put together 4 possible solutions for Planning Commission consideration. You can consider them or dismiss them, but just to kind of walk through them, what this is number 1, Planning Commission could consider limiting the number of tables provided as public seating. In the what's there today, there is approximately 4 tables in the public seating area. In the area to the left, that would be approximately 313 square feet. The applicant's proposal does not include any tables within the required view corridor. Another option could be to prohibit table umbrellas. Planning Commission might want to consider our downtown waterfront strategic plan. There are waterfront specific design guidelines, and an image that you see in the upper right corner of the screen is a screenshot showing illustrations of downtown waterfront design guidelines. Our waterfront master plan encourages outdoor dining. This is an outdoor dining that is associated with a sidewalk cafe, however, because it is proposed as public dining. But there is a certain sense of, adding to the overall ambiance of the waterfront area by providing, a nice scenic area. I also took the liberty of providing for Commission's consideration some examples today for what the outdoor seating looks like at Rose's Landing and Giovanni's Fish Market. I would point out, though, that the two images you see in the lower right-hand side of the screen, these were approved with the temporary use permit for the COVID pandemic. So these were not approved as permanent Planning Commission approved seatings, but it gives you some idea of some of that ambiance. And then options 3, if the Commission wants to consider affixing the seating that's proposed in that outdoor area as permanent, or potentially to address some of the businesses' concern, since they will be reducing signage in the window area, is whether or not Planning Commission would consider authorization for a street-facing sign permit to improve building visibility. This is an area that is pedestrian-oriented, and so it would be signage that is visible for pedestrians. And then here are those pictures that I mentioned earlier. So the picture on the left shows you what the tables look like today. So there is approximately 4 tables, I think, in this picture, maybe 3. And certainly if Planning Commission has some direction on if it is okay with the approved table design, I would note that like at Gio's Fish Market, it's wooden table with red patio umbrellas. It very much matches the character and the ambiance of the building architecture, whereas at Rose's Landing, it's metal seating with red table umbrellas, and that kind of also is unique to that Rose's Landing building. And here, what they're doing is they're proposing the same type of tables and seating as what was there all this past year during the COVID pandemic. The image on the right was taken this afternoon. You can see the pictures. You can see in the picture the tables in the background on the other side of the landscaping. Not quite as visible as, say, the picture on the left, but it shows you from both looking south and looking north. So staff's recommendation is to approve the project as conditioned in Resolution 1821. That would be to forward a favorable recommendation to the City Council for its final approval. That would also require a public hearing to be approved by City Council. This is a project that will provide an important gap, or would provide an important gap connection in the city's Harbor Walk system, which is a major priority of the city, where no access currently exists. In addition, the proposed public outdoor seating and the retail space building improvements, they are consistent with the visitor serving uses on the Embarcadero. It increases public access, provides amenities, and as I stated previously, really serves to liven up the area and give a nice refresh to the building. Staff's recommendation is to approve the project. It's consistent with the goals of the Waterfront Master Plan, the Downtown Waterfront Strategic Plan, and our recently adopted and certified General Plan LCP. And so with that, we recommend approval as stated on the screen, and I will conclude my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Cindy. Great presentation. Starting off, any ex parte communications. I will start and say that Joe and I met with both Marty and Mark Travis on site, and then we also met with Kathy Novak. And I did meet with Kathy Novak before the previous meeting, which when the item was canceled. So anybody else have any communications? Mike, your hand's up.
Yeah, no ex parte, but I did have a question for staff.
Okay, so
when you're ready.
Hang on one second. Bill, did you have any ex parte?
Yeah, ex parte. I spoke to Kathy Novak before the previous presentation, met her on the site to look at it with her, and then I spoke to her today on the phone as well.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Mike, you have a question?
Yeah, let me start here just because I was a little confused when I was going through the whole report. So on page number 2 and page number 51, it talks about removing 4 existing wood pilings. And on page number 3, it talks about 5 existing wood pilings. Now, are we doing 5 or are we doing 4?
That might be a typo. I can double check the plans and then and double check on that. Yeah.
Okay, good. So that'll be my start point. I just want to get that right. We need to get that right for us. Okay, now let me go ahead and ask a question. Again, I had when I did my initial review, all kinds of questions popped up for me. So I went through the whole paperwork, everything we got in order to answer those questions. So on page 58, I'd like to look at the existing permit, if you could pull that up. Page 58, the existing permit that's currently in place.
Oh, okay. Let's
That's
see.
on page 58.
Do you want me to share a screen with the permit? Okay.
Yes.
That might take me a second here. I wasn't expecting that. Okay, hold on a second. Okay, let's see. I'm going to share. Okay, can you see that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, if you could work your way to the next page. There you go. No, second page, please. Back. Again, I was confused because this came in as address 715 Embarcadero. We're amending this permit or changing this permit. So I wanted to make sure I totally understood what was going on here. So the original permit had 701 through 715 Embarcadero. Is there a reason why this change in permit does not use the same addresses? That would be my first question.
Sure. So the address that's 701 Embarcadero and the address that's 715 are 2 separate lease sites. And in the 1990s, when the city approved the permit, the applicant, the master leaseholder, had control of both lease sites, and they approved one CUP for both lease sites. And we do it that way sometimes. The project before you today, the area where the public access improvements only cover the lease site 8081, which is also known as 715 Embarcadero. And so since they weren't proposing any changes to 701 Embarcadero, we're amending the CUP, but it's just addressing the lease site to the north.
Yeah. And could you go back to the photo where you had the proposed new retail? Because that's where my second question comes, because I wanted to get all the players here. Because we did get correspondence and input from others, so I want to make sure I'm getting everybody involved in what I'm trying to do.
Okay, sure. Okay, do you mean this one here?
Yes, so it says where new harbor, the new retail space on the left side.
Uh-huh.
Now, I did go there and spend at least 45 minutes on site myself with others just to kind of try to feel things out. I noticed when I put, the first thing I noticed is 2 signs on each side saying property for rent or lease available or whatever. So that kind of set off something for me, and it said, so this is where I guess the new retail space is being proposed?
Yeah, in the northwest corner. Uh-huh.
Okay, so because on page number 35, you call out the fact that we would have to follow signage requirements if there were a second tenant that comes in there. So has that determination been made whether the current tenant or a second tenant, and then that set up the third question for me, which is how many tenants do we have here?
So right now there's one tenant in the building, which is Dolphin Shirt. There is the commercial fish processing area in the back. That space is not being used anymore. They are proposing to convert that fish processing use to retail, and how that shakes out in the building permit process, it becomes a landlord-tenant issue. So if as this is going through the planning stage, if the Dolphin Shirt Company says, hey, we want more retail square footage, they could come in with a building permit for the tenant improvements and make that one retail space. So whether it's one space or two spaces, it doesn't change the parking impacts, but it's proposed for retail space use, and right now they're anticipating that there would be a second tenant there. So that's why in the staff report it says, whatever, if that's a second retail space, then they'd have to, obviously have their own signage, but we're not locking them in that it has to be a second retail space.
Yeah, and the reason I brought that up and I thought it was important for us is because, we need to understand the impacts, number one, of new retail space. And if somebody were to come in there, what would they be dealing with as far as what we're trying to do here? So if we do grant, any kind of use in this use permit, additional use, then obviously that may impact that new retailer. So, I just wanted to make sure I understood how many leases or subleases do we have there? Yeah. We could have another lease if the overriding lease decides to go ahead and allow another retailer in there. So I just wanted to really visually, conceptually understand everything that could happen there and what we're trying to do there with that outside seating. So again, there could be some impact, little impact, a lot of impact, depending on what happens. So I just wanted everybody, I'll start with that and I'll stop with that, but I just want to make sure I understood the big conceptual framework of what we're trying to do at that space. Okay, mm-hmm. The back wasn't, the bay shore wasn't as concerning to me because it's in the back, but I know others may have issues, but the main issue for me was the streetscape, what's going on there, and all the players there and all the concerns there. So I wanted to make sure I addressed all of those if I could. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions for staff? Joe?
Cindy, a couple of questions. The view corridor between Dutchman's and the Dolphin Shirt Shop, I'm familiar with the concept of vertical access to the Harbor Walk, and in that vertical access, we don't allow obstructions like furniture, etc. So I gather that for the view corridor that we're talking about, part of it is a vertical access, and then a portion of it is simply a view corridor. Is that correct?
Sorry, I was muted. Yes, that's correct. So that view corridor is also serving as the vertical access, and they're proposing to remove obstructions in that area. And right now, that covered patio in the rear of the building obstructs the view corridor / vertical access. Mm-hmm.
And so then the big pots that were up close to the sidewalk for a while during the worst time of the pandemic, that was kind of an exception that everyone granted because of the extreme situation. Is that
right?
Okay.
Yeah.
With respect to the Harbor Walk, there's through the generosity of the lessee, they're going to build a little bit more of the Harbor Walk than they would absolutely be required to build. But nevertheless, the restrictions that apply to the Harbor Walk would still apply to that extra piece of the Harbor Walk. In other words, no part of that excess Harbor Walk could have dining tables and chairs and things like that. Is that correct?
That depends really on the conditioning of the project. They're required to have a minimum of 10 feet wide Harbor Walk access. So if they want, and if they have 20 feet, normally many of these projects, when they come forward, they just provide 10 feet and that's it. If they're proposing more than 10 feet, they could come back in the future and say, oh, we've decided that we'd like to, we notice that people hang out on the backside of the building because they're taking pictures and they want to sit down. So we're going to add some benches or tables so people can sit and take a rest. There would be no restrictions from putting tables or seating or benches or potted plants, in an area that's outside of the minimum 10. They're going to have 20 feet, then that's great. We get an extra 10 feet wide and we get even more public benefit because it really will, be wide open.
Okay, so if the Planning Commission wanted to impose some limitations, we would have to do it explicitly. Otherwise, they would be free to add things in that extra space. Is that a pretty basic understanding?
If you said, that would certainly be part of your deliberation if you didn't want any benches or seating in there. I will point out that typically when these kind of projects go to the Coastal Commission, it's not uncommon to see them add conditions that say, we want to have benches along the harbor walk. We want to have, amenities. They've conditioned that on several other of the Embarcadero projects where they specifically said, we want a minimum of 2 benches, or we want a table for 2. But they wouldn't condition a project in an area that's within the minimum 10 feet. So in this situation, I would not be surprised if they said, oh yeah, we'd like to see some benches on their CDP review.
Yeah, and to be clear, I'm not opposed to that. I think the boardwalk in general benefits from having a few benches every once in a while so people can sit on it. Now, with respect to the public seating area up closer to the Embarcadero, so the restaurant patrons could sit there, but the restaurant isn't going to provide any servers or tableware or condiments. Is that correct?
That is correct. And I believe that there is a condition in the resolution that would prohibit any type of table setups or hostess stand. And I would also imagine that the Coastal Commission will add that as a condition as well. In fact, the emergency CDP that they granted for all of this public dining that was, during the COVID pandemic, they also had in their CDP specifically called out no hostess stands, no, none of that. And that was even for uses that were tied to a restaurant. In this situation, they are proposing that truly as public and not tied to a restaurant.
Okay. And then the last question, part of one of the issues here has to do with whether there's been unreasonable obstruction of access to the surf shop. But I would imagine that the language in the city's lease as the master leaseholder is pretty vague in that it says, reasonable and safe access. It probably doesn't say anything more than that. So that this difference of opinion between the lessee and the sublessee as to what's really, for lack of a better word, a violation of the lease in terms of what can be placed in front of the store's access or not. That strikes me as really something between the parties and the representatives. I'm babbling here. So there's nothing really in the city's master leasehold that really sheds a light on whether these tables should be permitted in front of the store or not. If you at all understand what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. You're correct. I mean, unless it's specified in the lease that you're leasing that interior square footage and that you're also leasing the area in front of you, there's nothing planning-wise that would dictate or require that the Planning Commission dedicate or reserve space for a business in front. I mean, it's no different than, say, like at the boatyard at 845 and where the Otter Rock used to be, Porthouse at 885. There are businesses that are in the rear, they're on the side. They may not, have, the best street visibility or because they're, off. In this situation at 715 Embarcadero, it was approved to have this walkway and this landscaped area in the front. I don't know that there's necessarily, a guarantee that stays in that configuration. And then it's for the Planning Commission to decide, what are the goals of our DWSP and our Waterfront Master Plan? And do we want to liven up the pedestrian experience in the front there? Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. You've answered my question. Thanks, Eddie.
Commissioner Ingraffia, I wanted to provide some clarification to the first question that you asked. You asked if the area outside of the required 10-foot access way could tables be placed there without approval. The answer to that question is unequivocally no. They can place, if it's not on the plans, it doesn't go out there. So they would have to come back before the Planning Commission to add tables in that area. So that's, otherwise it's dedicated for, public access, and that's it. So if they wanted to add those types of things, they would be coming back and making that request of the Planning Commission.
Oh, I'm sorry, that's with respect to the tables on the Harbor Walk? Is that what you're
No, the area in the back, I'm sorry. You were asking about the Harbor Walk, and there was extra Harbor Walk available beyond the 10-foot requirement. And you were asking, just could they come back and put planters and put chairs and tables and stuff out there outside of the required 10-foot area? And my answer to that question, or clarification to that question, is no. If it's not on this plan, they can't do it, and would have to come back for amendment to the plan to add that in. Not that it's necessarily a bad thing, like Cindy indicated. That might be a nice thing to have out there, but that's not what's proposed. And if they wanted to do that, they would need to, make that request of the city. So.
Okay. Yeah, very good. Thank you. Yeah. That's it.
Bill, did you have questions?
So Cindy, a couple of quick ones, and this one might be for Scott. I'd like to continue what Joe was asking. Just so I understand, the 20-foot wide space, that stays public space on the Harbor Walk. And I guess if that's the case, any amendment to the plan, what kind of process does it go through?
So if it's approved, and it's all approved as 20-foot wide, and they're not proposing any tables or chairs, but then they say, people are tired of standing, and we want to put a couple of benches, and we want to put a couple of two-top tables. Likely what that would be a minor modification to the plans, which is approved at staff level, unless Planning Commission feels strongly that this is something that the Planning Commission needs to look at. But generally speaking, minor changes to that area outside of the 10-foot would be staff level. Obviously, anything within the minimum 10 would definitely go to the Planning Commission.
So this is quite a large space, 10 feet by, I don't know how long it is, how wide, but I'm guessing, what, any idea, Cindy? 10 feet by?
It is, 1 second. It looks like 63 feet.
Yeah, okay.
If we include the existing Harbor Walk area, so that the width of the lease site is 63 feet. So you would have, I have to scale it, but you'd have this new area that's 63 feet. About a third of that is existing Harbor Walk.
Right, and that's a third of that is in the area that's already got enclosed seating, right?
Yeah, the patio area, which is partially in that Harbor Walk area, and then also partially in the view corridor. So that cleans up that area back there.
So if the Planning Commission feels strongly enough that they would like to be a part of that decision because of the precedent it sets and the size, we would have to make that a condition.
Yes, and it's also good too, so in case there's no confusion that in the future, it may be years from now where, changes are proposed, and then you're putting that in as a condition to say this is, the opinion of the Planning Commission that we definitely do want to see this come back, and that's your prerogative.
Got it. Second question. When I was out there, I noticed there's an elevation change from the existing wharf to the adjacent area. I can't quite understand on the plans how they're proposing how they're going to do that. And it seems to me that the retail space is at the higher level, that the doors going into the retail space are at the raised wharf height. Is it clear in the plans how they're going to handle that?
So I think that'll get addressed further in the building stage, but what I would point out is that when the Roses Landing CUP was approved, the Planning Commission at that time added a condition that they provide for a transition to the Dutchman's lease site, because when it was approved, I think it was 2018, we weren't expecting the Dutchmans to redevelop until 2032, which I think is when this lease site renews. And the applicant for the architect, I believe, for the Dutchmans has already been communicating for the architect for Rose's Landing, and they've already been working on that. And Kathy Novak Consulting, I'm pretty sure, could give some more details on that.
And I'm concerned because if it goes lower, it means the retail space is not accessible from the back.
Yeah, and they'll have to address that and be compliant with ADA.
Right, and the impact to us is that then the back of the building stays the back of the building because it's no longer accessible from the walk. One real quick question. I noticed other things on the side of the building that they're, like the electrical service, is that on the plans to be relocated?
I don't think it's identified on the plans at that level of detail.
Thanks, Cindy.
Yeah.
Thank you. I just had a couple questions more for my own interest and from some of the public comment. When was the last time that wharf back there was used by the public for fishing, or is it? It seems pretty inaccessible, unless you go back there with Kathy Novak. And I don't know how recently it was used for commercial fishing, how recently the fish processing area had been used. Do we have any? Kathy probably has all that information.
Yeah, I will allow her to answer that. I don't think it's been that many years, but because I want to say when Rose's Landing CUP went to the Planning Commission in, I think it was 16, 17, 18, those years, that it was in use then, but I may be speaking out of turn, so that might be a question for the applicant.
Okay, all right, thank you. Mm-hmm. Any other questions for staff before we open up for public comment? Looks pretty good.
I just have one more question. Yeah, I just have one more question. Just to kind of, on page number 34 again, we talk about color materials and the fact that the applicant may be coming back for a separate permit. So can you address that a little bit, Cindy, about what that would entail and our involvement in that? Thank you.
Sure. So the only separate planning permit that I'm aware of would be the sign permit. Can you point me to the page?
Yeah, sure. It's on page number 34. It says that the Dutchman development will, through a separate permit activity, also be updated with the same color materials as reflected to. I just want to make sure that we all understood that we may still be involved. This has kind of set me off after Bill asked his question about the fact that we may still be involved in this.
Oh, okay. I see what you're talking about. Okay.
Yep.
So the action before you tonight is only for, it's 7:15. The southern building, what that separate permit activity is referring to is a building permit activity. So they're not proposing to make any structural changes or harbor walk changes or anything that would trigger a CUP amendment. If they are proposing to repaint the building and make those facade improvements or change the roof, that's not something that triggers a planning permit. So that's that reference it's the bottom of page 7 on the staff report. It says the southern building of the Dutchman development will, through a separate permit activity, also be updated. That's just to let you know that it will be an integrated design, both of these two buildings. And can I answer your other question, Commissioner Rodriguez?
Sure.
The plans are showing that there are 5 existing wood pilings that would be removed, and that there would be 3 existing wood pilings that would be either sleeved or repaired through an epoxy jacket.
Okay, so on page 2 then of the staff report, we'll go ahead and correct that to make sure it doesn't say 4 existing, right? Because that was right there. That's on the cover of the applicant's proposal. So that should say 5.
Okay, my apologies. Yes, sir.
So thank you.
Okay, any other questions for staff? So let's open it up for public comment, and generally we give first position to the applicant or their agent. So Anthony, in this case, that would be Kathy Novak, if she would like to make a presentation.
Yes, I see Kathy's hand up. I'm going to go ahead and unmute Kathy. What happened to Kathy?
She's on the. She's. I promoted her. Sorry, before you got over.
Sorry about that.
There she is.
I clicked OK, and then all of a sudden it shut me off, and then came back on again for some reason. I'm not sure.
All right.
Anyway, good evening, Chair Stewart and Commissioners. My name is Kathy Novak, and I'm here tonight representing the applicant for the 715 Embarcadero project. Before I begin, I'd like to thank staff for their time and assistance with this project and their favorable recommendation to forward this project to the City Council. Staff has covered the major points both verbally and in writing, so I'm going to be as brief as possible with my comments tonight, and you also have my project description attached to your staff report as number B. I would like to say that overall this project is all about new public benefits. It will create an important and critical harbor walk connection as well as provide public outdoor seating along the Embarcadero. It also creates a new retail space by converting the old fish processing space. One important note that I would like to mention, and it has been said by staff tonight already, is that the applicants are approximately 12 years remaining on their lease, but they are willing to construct the project now, which will offer a significant benefit by installing a missing link of the harbor walk several years before a new lease would require the capital improvements to be done. Next, you received a letter from the Dolphin Shirt representative, and I'd like to take the time to provide some comments on that communication. First, the letter points out that the applicant did pull this project off calendar and has subsequently modified the proposal by eliminating the interior floor plan design change with a new retail space in order to address their prior concerns. Second, I would like to say that the outdoor dining was previously occupied in the occupying space next to the building, the Dutchman restaurant, and there was a rope barricade and planters, as you saw in the slides that Cindy provided. And this was blocking the sidewalk access to the rear of the property. This was done specifically to accommodate the restaurant during the COVID closures and was left intact due to the uncertainty of the future restrictions. The applicants have removed this now, and this is in keeping with the plans as proposed tonight. Third, the letter mentions that the sidewalk to the front of the store and a small northern doorway is a narrow walkway, and that it also is adjacent to a driveway, which frequently has delivery and other vehicles parked in it. Specifically, to address these comments, I'd like to say the driveway was installed back in the 1990s and was done and used originally for access to the wharf and the fish processing. It is also the access for the Rose's trash containers on that side. And we also see this as a benefit of keeping delivery trucks from double parking on the Embarcadero. As far as the narrow walkway, I will point out that both walkways from the Embarcadero are approximately 8 feet wide plus. The smaller walkway along the building frontage behind the tree is approximately 5 feet wide, and all of these will remain the same with the proposed project. The applicant is trying to propose a project that the city has envisioned in the downtown waterfront strategic plan and meet the design goals of that document. For example, the DWSP states in part, quote, outdoor dining areas should have at least 4 feet of unobstructed pedestrian circulation space along the sidewalk, walks, and streets or pedestrian space. And also that the design of the small seating areas, plazas, and outdoor dining is encouraged as an integral component of all new development to enhance the downtown and the waterfront environments. This proposal provides a pleasant and festive atmosphere to draw in pedestrians from the Embarcadero. I would also like to add, so that we are all clear, that this is an open public seating and there will be no hostess stand or table service. Next, there was a couple of other comment letters that came through, and I'd also like to take a moment to address those. One point was made, why is the harbor walk going to be 20 feet instead of 10 feet? The answer is because the existing deck to the south and the wharf to the north will extend westward further than the harbor walk if it was only proposed at 10 feet. This would create an unusual reduction in space for pedestrian access between the wharf and the existing deck. The applicant thought that the additional public space would be a benefit, therefore, this proposal. There was also another comment regarding a 6-foot pop-out, but I'm not quite certain what this pertains to, so I can't answer that question. A further comment was inquiring about the tables and the seating on the Harbor Walk, and as Scott has mentioned this, there's none proposed in this project tonight, and if any further seating was to be done, it would require prior approvals. I guess the only thing that I would add here to that is, like Cindy mentioned, that if the Coastal Commission requires benches, for example, as part of their project approvals, that I would ask for the Planning Commission to consider that, and rather than coming back to the Planning Commission to ask for your approval for a couple of benches that the Coastal Commission is requiring, that we just consider that in the condition. Another comment was about vertical access, awnings, and wayfinding from the street to the bay. The vertical access will remain as it is now. The building awnings will provide articulation, the retail shop signage, and a visual entrance to the building, but does not impact the pedestrian views. As with other projects, coastal access signage will be added to the Harbor Walk side, and there is existing signage on the Embarcadero side. These are all consistent with the other projects to provide the wayfaring signage. Last is the comment concerning eelgrass. First, proposed Harbor Walk extension is over the rock riprap area, as noted in the eelgrass report that was submitted to the city for review, and this will be constructed with a fiberglass grate system that will offer light penetration. Second, if anything, this project could benefit eelgrass by removing approximately 445 square feet of wharf that currently shades this area. This new open area will allow for potential eelgrass growth where none exists now. Last, I would like to say that it was, as I was approached with a concept from if the applicant would retain the entire wharf as currently configured, and to include in the proposal that this area could be cordoned off for private events such as wedding parties and etc. as a way to generate income. I indicated that I did not believe that the Coastal Commission would approve this type of proposal, and I would do my best to confirm that prior to this meeting tonight. I was able to speak with the coastal planner this afternoon, and she said there are limited uses allowed over coastal waters, and any type of private use of this wharf area would not be acceptable to the Coastal Commission. So in closing, I would just like to say that these folks have businesses here as well, and we're all trying to survive as everybody else is. Fresh paint, added public spaces, and building upgrades are important components that create a vibrant waterfront and a visitor-serving area. These applicants believe that the project is for the greater good and will be a real asset to the waterfront. So on behalf of the Van Buren's, I would respectfully ask for the Commission's recommendation for approval of the project as presented tonight. That concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have. And maybe, Bill, I can try to address your quick elevation change. And I think Cindy really kind of described what happened was when the architect for this project met with the architect and the contractors when they were doing the Roses Landing project to foresee any elevation changes, and so Roses was able to configure their ramp way up to a certain elevation. We recognize that we've got the existing wharf on the south side, and there will have to be some sort of a slight slope within the ADA requirements to be able to meet these between Roses and the existing wharf and the wharf behind this project now. So it's a kind of a tricky maneuver, but we're trying to do our best to be able to get that within ADA requirements the best we can. Thanks for your time. I appreciate it. And please let me know if you have any questions.
Thanks, Kathy. Hang around in case we do have questions. Anthony, do we have some other people in the queue? I see the Travis hand is up.
Yes, I also saw Sean Green's hand up before that, so I'm going to unmute Sean Green first.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, Sean, be unmuted.
Thank you, Planning Commission and staff. I do want to thank Cindy for responding to the public comments with some thoughtful suggestions in advance of this meeting that she presented, so I thought that was great. Thanks to Kathy for addressing some of those as well. And definitely I want to say thank you to the public commenters for acknowledging the unfortunate ongoing practice of private leaseholders making private use of spaces specifically conditioned as public in their existing CUPs. It was actually the previous Planning Commission that was just a meeting or two away from moving forward with a comprehensive review or compliance audit of sorts that would truly benefit the Embarcadero, in my opinion. It's no surprise that applicants with proposed projects on the agenda suddenly remove major obstacles, which is such a bummer because it could so easily be avoided if folks simply complied from the get-go. View corridors or vertical access, Cindy brought this up. And I think she mentioned 10 feet, and then I think Kathy mentioned 8 feet. I'm talking about the central corridor between the two buildings, that kind of tunnel or dungeon that you can't really see anything through. I'm not sure. I basically have a question about the width there and how that's being calculated, because it seems more like 4 or 5, maybe 6 feet. If you also factor in the awning that juts north off of the south building, it seems like that awning is actually not really serving any purpose, because maybe that used to be a key entrance, when now that awning seems to just point at the north building, and removing it might add the appearance of an additional 3 or 4 feet through that corridor and improve sight lines and views to the bay and sand spit, and would encourage pedestrians to actually access this public space on the waterfront, which is promising. There was a comment about tables and umbrellas and how it would be an asset for those to color match the adjacent buildings. It might even be worth discussing from a planning commission standpoint if actually having a different color may benefit the general public, perhaps Morro Bay choosing a color that becomes our public color, and then the public can then know with no uncertainty that these are all public spaces rather than disguised private dining areas. And then lastly, a comment about staff approvals of minor modifications. I am all for administrative approvals to streamline processes, but basically because of the historical creep of private into public along the waterfront, and a general willingness to skirt CUP stipulations in such an important area, I would be all for a planning commission getting involved in even minor modifications to this all-important city-controlled space that really determines the success or failure of our visitor serving districts. So that's just my 2 cents. Thank you very much for addressing many of our comments and for treating this project with the respect that it deserves. Thank you.
Thanks, Sean. Appreciate your comments. Anthony, anybody else in the queue?
Yes, I see Marty Travis. I'm going to go ahead and unmute Marty Travis. Okay, Marty, you are unmuted.
Hi there. This is Mark Travis. I'm speaking on behalf of my wife, Marty, and I. We're the owners of Dolphin Shirt Company. I'm sure you all have received the agenda and correspondence submitted to the commission last week by Jane Heath. There was also a similar letter submitted by Sean Green back in July. His letter stated many of the same concerns. I would like to add to that now. Our store entrance is set back at least 30 feet from the sidewalk, with a large plaza in between. This has always been a place for tourists to gather, take photos, and enjoy the view. The plaza is where the outdoor dining spaces are located on the plan. We support the Harbor Walk extension, but have concerns about the proposed outdoor dining. The plans to us don't show any visual drawings of how these 2 dining areas are to look. This leaves us wondering about the design and why the details were left out. I would like the commission to note that the smaller of the 2 public dining spaces appears to be only 4 feet from our entrance door. This would impede access to our business. It would also be next to a row of trash dumpsters. This trash area is used by 2 large and busy restaurants. The driveway on the right is used for trash pickup, deliveries, and maintenance workers. It is also 2 feet from where the dining tables would be located, the driveway. In our opinion, this area doesn't make for a very appealing place for the public to sit. Our suggestion is to remove this secondary dining area from the plan. We ask you, please do not forward a recommendation to the city council for this project. The large outdoor dining space plans are incomplete and in need of detail and photos. We ask that the small dining area that blocks our access be removed from the plans before moving it forward. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Mark. Anthony, do we have anyone else for public comment?
Thank you, Chair. I do not see any raised hands left in the queue.
All right, we'll bring it back to the commission. Who wants to start us off? I guess, first of all, let's see. Joe, you've got your hand up.
Sure. Okay, let's see. First things, with respect to the dining area to the south of the shirt factory, clearly we want one or two signs, I think, in evidence saying that this is for the public and not private and we're all welcome. I think there should be some sort of aesthetically pleasing barrier. I think I would opt for wooden stanchions and a rope, something to avoid the inevitable creep of the chairs and seats into what I'll call the vertical access, so we don't have that problem. I like very much the suggestion that was made that we should, at this hearing, say yes if the Coastal Commission would like to put several benches in that additional boardwalk space, that the applicant doesn't have to come back to us for that. Let's see. I hadn't thought about the awnings, but I think we should examine it. If the awnings, in fact, are not serving a substantial purpose, and they do block some of the view, then I think they should come down. I really think that the idea of having some uniformed umbrella design for the whole boardwalk is an excellent, for the Embarcadero is an excellent suggestion, in that it would be another way of telling people that this is public and not a private area. And then finally, I am sympathetic to the owners of the shirt store, but I just have a feeling in this instance for the Planning Commission to address whether the proposed seating is reasonable or unreasonable obstruction of their access is really just a little bit of an overreach on the part of this body. I really think that the matter needs to be resolved if it continues, again, as I said earlier, between the lessee and the sublessee and their representatives, and maybe they can work something out. But I don't think it's for this body to decide that, I don't think it's for this body to decide whether it's too many dining tables. Those are my thoughts.
Thanks, Joe. Mike, you've got your hand up?
Yeah, I was hoping I could ask Mark a question, before we, regarding this. Is Mark Travis still available to answer a question?
It looks like he may be, yes, still there, and we could reopen public comment to allow Mark to answer the question.
Yeah, Mr. Travis, this is Mike Rodriguez. I just want to ask you a question.
Sure.
You've been there a long time, obviously, 20 years, and we've all been going through a lot for the last couple of years. And I've been thinking about this only because, we don't know when the end date will come as far as this pandemic. We're going to see more seating on exteriors due to the pandemic. I'm concerned that we don't start creeping into an area we don't want to, do piecemeal approvals, and especially in that Embarcadero area where Sean Green stated, that's probably the most valuable area in our city. What is your sense of what could happen over time if we don't kind of do this with more of a concerted effort, not a piecemeal, not a creep approach, because we're going to do it now. If we do it now, what could be the effect for others? And, because the pandemic's a real deal, but, and we're going to have to deal with it. So I just don't want to start something that we're going to have to continue to do in a piecemeal approach. Should we study the Embarcadero? That would be an option in order to make sure we get things right. So I just want your opinion on that, Mr. Travis.
Yeah, I think I kind of fear that it's the camel nose under the tent thing. It's just like you're just gonna keep creeping forward, and that it's like a disaster is gonna help this creep. And in my situation, I'm really worried about our access and just getting inundated with all kinds of the apparatus that goes along with all the people, the restaurants using large tables and umbrellas and stuff like that. I don't know. I think it could get out of hand if it's not shepherded in the right way, and there needs to be rules, I think, so that it doesn't get out of hand. Anyway, that's I just fear that future where every time something bad happens, there's a new rule and some kind of thing that makes it harder to stay in business. I kind of think tables and chairs and stuff like that are barricades, and it turns into a self-serving thing when they're placed there under the guise of it's for the public. There used to be cement tables, those look really public-y, but those are long gone. I don't know what happened to those. So I wouldn't be opposed to having those back.
Okay, thank you, Mark. We'll close public comment again. Mike, I'd like to make a quick response to that, and maybe Mr. Graham would have something to say as well. Given that they're not allowing table settings to be put out or a hostess stand, that does sort of preclude the ideas that these would be specific to that restaurant. But the other thing is, in the Downtown Waterfront Strategic Plan, one of the design elements was to add more of the public seating and tables for a sort of general ambiance and liveliness on the streetscape. So I don't know if Scott would like to address that a little bit. It's not completely indiscriminate to this pandemic. It's something that the pandemic, in a way, triggered the response that allowed us to try it to see how it was working. But also it has been part of a bigger plan for Morro Bay.
Yeah, and that's what I was trying to bring up. The fact that the pandemic drove this, but yet we could have more of this. Mm-hmm. That's all I want to bring up, is the fact that we could have more requests for changes to conditional use permits for this use. So what would be the impact along the Embarcadero as a whole? That's all I was trying to bring up. Okay. Thank you.
All right, thanks. Scott, did you have any other response you wanted to?
I do, and I think Mr. Rodriguez's point and concern is a good one, and I think what you, Commissioner Stewart, brought up is also good, in that we have adopted plans that tell us that we want these things, and we want these things for a reason. These things enliven the streetscape. They connect with the pedestrian. They bring more people onto the lease site. They make it look more lively. in both downtown and the waterfront. That's why our downtown and waterfront strategic plan includes outdoor seating for the public. I think we got to see what that looks like on a test case because of COVID, right? Our response to that and limitations for, early on for seating inside, or the elimination of seating inside, and then it could only be 25%. So when we moved outside, you saw what that looked like. It's pretty hopping place down there. And I think that's, what was envisioned by the previous planning documents that suggest we put the seating out there. So, it needs to be done respectfully. I do like us, I do like the commission considering, some sort of limitation so we can say that the areas outlined on the plan for the outdoor seating is, that's where it's limited to, and what can we do to do that? And Cindy proposed, some options there for you to consider, like affixing the tables to the ground so they can't creep right into those public corridors. I mean, that's a pretty good one. Whether you want to consider umbrellas or not is another story entirely, but there are things to do that we can cordon them off, as Commissioner Graffia said. We could have, exterior cordoning off of them with, ropes or things like that, that do that, or planters even, or what have you. So there are certainly options, but I think the thing you take away from this is that our planning documents and the ones that are adopted by the city encourage this. I think it's a good thing, not a bad thing. And I understand the concern of, the tenant at this location. But I think if we are considerate, of how we deal with the seating, maybe limiting the number of tables, that type of thing, that we won't get that creep that I think concerns them the most. And certainly if they did, after it's permitted, they can contact us and we can enforce the requirements that are approved for the project, meaning the plans, the layouts, the conditions of approval. All of those things can be enforced upon the leaseholder. So I think we do have mechanisms to make sure that everybody behaves as they should.
Right. And I do think also, in terms of sidewalk access up to and around the buildings, and the lateral accesses, all have to be both ADA and pedestrian friendly. So you cannot block more than, a sidewalks or into the sidewalk width kind of area, even adjacent to the buildings. You would need to leave that wheelchair accessible, for example, leading up to and into the building. I know, and I don't know if she needs to comment on it, Kathy mentioned to us that the gate on the north side of the building, that's actually, when it's closed, would cover those trash areas, is going to be removed. So that will be another vertical access on the north side of that building to the Harbor Walk, as well as the one that's in between the Dutchman's building and the Dolphin Shirt Company building. And I do think, there's a different feel when you drive that and when you are down walking it at pedestrian level. I think when that covered seating area in the back is removed, there will be quite a wide and clear vision to the waterfront. In my mind, I wasn't too disturbed by the awnings. It's an interesting thing to consider. I will just say, as a business owner, in the lovely and rare occasions when we have rain, I would love to have an awning out in the front of my front door as a way to sort of give people a place to stand and shake out the umbrellas before they walk in. So we don't often get a hot sunny day where you need that kind of shade or shelter. But again, at the pedestrian level, the awnings have not bothered me in terms of the visibility. But I would be open to the commission discussing that. I would also be interested in considering perhaps, if there's going to be 4 tables in that outdoor seating area kind of to the south, in what I call the pebbled area of the sidewalk. It has a sort of pebbly surface instead of the brick and concrete surface. Maybe rather than having the table in the little smaller triangle, perhaps have benches on either side of it, maybe with a small, again, non-movable table area in between that you could set your water bottle on, something like that. I could see that as a concession, perhaps not having, full on table seating there, but having some benches people could sit and have a lunch, have a sandwich. Don't know if anybody else has any thoughts on that. Mike, you've got your hand up.
Yeah. Susan, and I just want to thank your comments and Scott's, because this is kind of where I ended up, when I was doing my review, because as part of the Planning Commission resolution on page 41, letter E, and this is really, really what the deal is for any planning commission. It says the proposed project does not diminish either directly or by cumulative impact of several similar projects, the use, enjoyment, or attractiveness of adjacent buildings, and provides a visual, you just said that, a visual and pedestrian transition connection point to its immediate neighbors to the north and south. That's where I was trying to get to, and it would be nice if tenants could work together to ensure that they have that harmony and they have that respect, as Scott tried to say, in a respectful manner. That's exactly where I ended up today. I was trying to get there. Excellent. And I got stuck. So this is what I want to see. That's why I asked Scott, and then you chimed in, but you were talking about E. So I think we need to make sure that we do make that finding as a commission. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Joe.
Yeah, actually, I'm glad you made your point about the chairs and tables on the southern seating area, because aesthetics is a consideration. When I went to the property and looked at it, and I counted 16 of those rattan chairs and 4 of the tables, and there is also a permanently affixed, very attractive metal bench. And the bench is unusable because of the crowding of the tables and chairs. I think it's aesthetically unpleasing to have that many tables and chairs in that small space. So one thing I would be in favor of very much would be reducing the number of tables and chairs, or reconfiguring what we put in there rather than all tables and chairs. But I think for those fairly large tables, and as I say, 4 chairs gathered around it is too much. It's self-defeating. It doesn't look good. And I think we want the place to be inviting as well as convenient.
Thanks, Joe. Bill, your hand is up.
I think this is really interesting, and I'd like to start by saying that the project is pretty fantastic. To make the connection along the Harbor Walk is a big deal. I would even go further and say the Harbor Walk, it's like not just a tourist destination, it's a total event. And one of the interesting things as you look around the country, East Coast to West Coast, waterfront walks are becoming more and more popular, more and more destinations. And they're really fantastic. And Morro Bay, we have a beautiful one. If we can make it continuous, inviting, if we can do it well, it can rank up there right with the very best of them. And this project will help do that. There's 3 areas that I think are important to policy on this project. Some of them have more to do with city policy than it has to do with the project itself, I think. The one is public space becoming privatized. Sean Green spoke to that. Many of the comment letters went to that. There's been a lot of discussion. And that's certainly what, Mark was talking about, is that these spaces, even though we want to encourage umbrellas, we want to encourage tables, they're not always balanced in terms of how they interface with the, let's call it the perceived openness of the space and also the publicness of the space. I think this is a city's responsibility to make sure that public space remains public. Like Mark mentioned, like the tables, the concrete tables being very public tables, I know why he says that, because then it becomes clear that you're invited to sit there. You don't have to go to the restaurant to go there. This is an important cue because a lot of people, the people that are here we know, but someone visiting the space is not going to read the signs and understand the complexity of the map. I thought another interesting comment, I think this was from Sean, the idea of public color. If umbrellas had a consistent color and quality, all of a sudden then this is Morro Bay, this is public space. How we get to that, I think, is important because it's going to set a precedent with this project, maybe more so than any one I've seen, and maybe more so than most projects we've seen. So for me, the number one big issue is the public space becoming privatized. And that's in the front and in the back. Right along the Harbor Walk, for me, the big thing is, how does the Harbor Walk maintain a kind of a continuation and become a public face? A lot of water walks are actually at the back of buildings because rivers, bays were actually, industrial spaces. The more public spaces were in the front. Now that's changing. And so you have a Harbor Walk that's actually a public face. In terms of this project, there's certain things that make public spaces and would make the Harbor Walk continuous. One of the big ones staff raised already is the guardrail. If the guardrails have a continuity, then you begin to understand that this really is a continuous walk. Other things are things like lighting, believe it or not. If we let the lighting happen individually by each building, the color of the lights change. All of a sudden, rather than this being seen as a kind of a stroll along an elegant walk, it becomes like individualized and actually starts to become more privatized. The two big things, I think, in the back for continuation have to do with the face. This was the back of this building. The elevations as proposed are long and blank. They have very little glass facing the walk. And in the one place is something I call a focal point, where the existing walk hits the building and now will continue to the right, from Rose's Court. There's a garage door there now, and the proposal is two very minor looking small doors. When you design something like this, you have to consider focal points, destinations, and ends. The project as proposed doesn't. The other thing I don't understand is, the large blank wall. You want to put on every public face, you want to put glass or some sort of animation that shows that this is a place where you're invited to be. You should be. It's not supposed to turn its back and look away from you. The project hasn't considered that, and our guidelines are not asking for that. Many urban design guidelines actually have a percentage requirement of window or glass, and they do that to show that interconnection between the building and the walk. And this is how you make a street feel not just alive, but protected and part of the public way. My final point that I'm concerned about, and this is something that I don't think Morro Bay maybe has come to grips with, the wharf, the existing wharf, is a piece of history. It's also a narrative. It's about our past. It's speaking about what Morro Bay has been for a very long time, and I think that's part of Morro Bay's brand. If we, without consideration and thought, eliminate, I think, these pieces of history, you never get them back. They're gone forever. One of the interesting things I talked earlier about water walks is that many water walks or public walks, like in New York City, the High Line, It's, I'm sure many of you know it, the High Line is an abandoned railroad track that they've made into this amazing public way. It's the #1 tourist attraction in New York City, which is unbelievable. And one reason it works so well, it's well designed and well considered. And along that walk, there are a series of events where you can walk the walk and then sit and pause. A place to look at the view, a place to sort of enjoy, I don't know, a unique event, possibly like the historic wharf. I guess what I'm saying is that I think it's important that this project consider these issues. We don't have standards or guidelines on what the harbor walk, how it should be done. We don't have glass things. We don't talk about focal points. We don't talk about consistency and continuity of guardrails or lighting. But we could do it with this project. We could make some decisions through staff and make sure that these things are I think, considered in this project, and then become opportunities for future projects. So rather than setting, I think, bad or unconsidered precedents, I really do think we need to be more considerate on these 3 points. One of the things we could do, I think, is really ask staff to come back and look at some of these things about standardizations. They're not that hard to do. They could be done in a memo and then sort of a commission, we could do a vote to consider them as part of a commission recommendation. But then they would become a way for the next project to sort of have sense and intention relative to what this project does. For me, this is way too big of a deal for Morro Bay to be, I think, I don't want to rush it and not be thoughtful. There are 3 big points: privatization of public space, continuity of the Harbor Walk, and the third point is loss of our history and our historic narrative. Let me leave it at that, and maybe we can have further discussion.
Thanks, Bill. I would have a couple responses to that, and I think I'd like to open it back up to Scott and maybe Cindy and perhaps Kathy. I know in other projects that we have reviewed on the waterfront, things like lighting have come up and have related to the architecture of the particular building. So we have kept the integrity of some of these buildings. They've been built at different time periods, and the designers did a really great job of picking things that were specific to that architect or that building that I think were effective. I would certainly agree that a certain amount of continuity is important, and certainly staff called out the railings. I personally think we would want to be careful about the Disneyland, kind of, we all have to look the same and have this theme running the whole space. And continuity is important. And I've often thought about certain kinds of color coding for different parts of town, never mind, certain things on the waterfront. So that idea of identifying public spaces, say with the Morro Bay blue that's on the Harbor Walk signage, could be an appropriate way to approach that. In terms of the history, that was partly why I brought up the question of, how recently was all of that used for fishing and fish processing? But also there's a condition of the dock that I believe Kathy mentioned was not in great shape. So this was a way that part of it was preserved, but any more disturbance, certainly in the eelgrass areas and all of that, could be avoided by, not trying to do any sort of repair in an area that isn't very serviceable. So
Well, just a real quick one, Susan.
Sure.
When I first went down there, when this was on the original, agenda, I mean, there was still a boat moored to the side of that wharf and was being used.
Okay.
So I buy this, but I guess my concern would be, do we knock something down without consideration and thought that we'll never get back again? And I'm not saying we have to keep it. I'm not saying that at all, but I think there needs to be consideration and thought. And I don't know if it should be left up to individual, applicants to make those decisions for the entire Harbor Walk and for our city.
Okay. Let's see. Scott, do you have, or Cindy, any comments on that? Any history to fill in?
I mean, ultimately, they're all valid issues that are raised. I mean, certainly the wharf does speak back to the history of Morro Bay. You have to balance that. You, specifically the Planning Commission, have to balance that in your decision-making process, right? You have an applicant coming forward with significant investment in the public improvements. All of this is public, basically, to provide the connection to the Harbor Walk. You've had the applicant, provide indication that the portion of the wharf, the pilings that support it are in bad shape and need to be repaired / replaced. And Ms. Novak has indicated to me that the cost is approximately $150,000. That's an additional $150,000 to a project that's going to cost about $750,000 outright, from what Ms. Novak indicated to me earlier today. So not an insignificant, amount of public benefit going in there. If there was a way, to sort of preserve it, and I know Kathy did speak with the Coastal Commission staff today, and she indicated that earlier, that we wouldn't be able to put other uses out here, and that's always their initial response. Okay, so I think we have the ability to do things along the waterfront, to have interim or temporary events take place all on the waterfront. That allowance is in the form of temporary use permits and things like that. And those are part of our LCP. So Coastal saying you can't do this is not necessarily 100% true. I think if we tried to, privatize the space for just a commercial use to maybe say offset the cost of the repairs or something, that probably wouldn't fly. But, uses once in a while, I think would be fine. So figuring out what that is, figuring out if there's, some ability or interest on the part of the applicant to pay the extra money if they were able to generate income there. I mean, it's a conversation worth having. Commissioner Roshan and myself talked about this earlier today. I don't know if his, position on it's changed from our conversation, because things sort of evolve over time. Even our conversations about umbrellas and things kind of evolved this today, I would say, from the beginning of the day or from yesterday to today. And so I'm not exactly sure, but being able to have that conversation is a good idea. I mean, if we have the ability to potentially preserve it, why not have the conversation? And maybe we can do it between now and when the project moves forward to City Council, because that would be, assuming they can come out of here with some sort of approval or recommendation from the Commission, that would be going to the City Council in November. Certainly, we could schedule a meeting like that with Ms. Novak, the owner, and staff, and we could have that conversation to see if is there something that we can work out. I mean, it's worthwhile. I mean, I think it'd be great if we were able to preserve it. But I think it's also, I don't want to preserve it at the cost of the actual connection here. That to me is really the most important piece. If we're able to do this other thing, that'd be fantastic. And if we're able to come up with a solution that would allow the applicant to pay for it, then all the better. I like that. That seems like a win-win for everybody. Because it would be kind of a cool space to have out there. I mean, I walked out on it, first time I walked out on it, it was blowing like 50 miles an hour, so not super comfortable, but I have been out there when it was nicer than that. So
I think if and I see some other hands up, but I think if we were to push for the preservation, what would be important to me is that there be some sort of indication of what it was, when it was, what it was for, who used it. And perhaps that is something that that could go on that back wall. I know when I was out there and Joe with Kathy the other day, we were talking about, well, is there going to be a window in there? If you're going to put a storefront in that space, generally, and she said, once they got a tenant, they would likely need to put some sort of window and all the kinds of things that make a retail space comfortable. But in the meantime, maybe there could be some sort of informational stuff there. I do see Kathy's hand up, and maybe she could respond to some of these questions about what condition that wharf is in and what it would take.
Thanks. Yes, the wharf needs repair, and it needs to be done soon. We've got it planned, and we've actually put in the project description a request that we pull the wharf repair out and permit that as soon as possible, as far as a building permit. So if we have the opportunity to go in and do this repair this winter, we will. And by waiting too long, then we start the construction time down too far and getting into, let's say, the high tourist season, and we don't want to be disruptive. So we need to take them in and try to do it right now. There's a couple things on the list. If you don't mind, I'd like to try to just go down my list, just kind of answer a couple of the commission's questions. Joe mentioned a barrier with like a rope and stanchions. We're fine with that. The awnings coming down, the applicant is fine with that, but I just want to have you notice that one of the awnings that is there is over the Dolphin t-shirt business, and it does have their business signage on it. So if you're talking about removing awnings, we just want to be conscious of that. There was a mention about industrial tables. Yes, there was concrete tables out there a number of years ago, but they're very large, they're heavy, they're cold, and they're not inviting. We're certainly, Joe, you brought up the idea of reducing the number of tables. If we went from 4 tables to 3 tables to create a little bit more space around that, the applicant is fine with that. As far as fishing, fish processing stopped the first quarter of 2019. So I can answer that question. Just want to point out on the railings, the staff has the cable railings to match Rose's, but the railings behind the Dutchman restaurant are the same as what was approached with this project, only because of the continuity between the Dutchman and this part of the project that we proposed those railings. We're fine making the change. The railings that are behind the Dutchman with the metal posts and the wood caps were the city's original railing design for the Harbor Walk. So the city has transitioned from that type of railing to this new kind of railing. So we were just for background information. So we're fine with that. That's not a problem. The windows on the rear, yes, we're going to look at that. And as Susan just mentioned, depending on what kind of retail tenant we get, what kind of windows that we can put in there, try to do it. I think we were happy to look at any kind of interpretive panel that might talk about the fish processing and the wharf that was there. We're happy if the Planning Commission proceeds with this recommendation to sit down with staff, like Scott mentioned, and have a discussion about the wharf preservation. It's a matter of cost, and as Scott mentioned, the project now is close to $750,000, and we're getting caught here because we've got some public comment saying, "Well, why are you putting 20 feet? You only need 10." And now we're talking about keeping more public access. So we're getting kind of beat up from both sides here about this. But if that solves the problem, to have this conversation prior to the city council meeting, the applicant and we're happy to sit down with staff and everybody and talk about it. So hopefully that helps out a little bit.
Thanks, Kathy. That is helpful. Bill.
This is partly for Kathy, but I think there's 3 substantial missing pieces of information on this project. The number one thing that I'm concerned about is the elevation changes in the back. That Kathy mentioned that they'll make it work with ADA. Well, you have to do ramps and stuff like that. 60 feet, even at the maximum, only gives you 3 or 4 inches to change that. And, you probably don't want to have that whole thing sloping. I think that there needs to be an elevation plan that shows us how this continuation works. The other reason I'm worried about that, if there is retail space on the back, the elevation plan matters. And I'm confused about what the intent of the applicant is about the retail, because there are no windows. It's not showing what it is, and the elevations are likely not to work, especially if they have to somehow drop the height of the boardwalk, of the harbor walk. So, and then the thing that I think is missing is a table plan and layout for the front, and any kind of table plan that might be considered for the harbor walk. If we had a table plan that showed one with 4 tables, one with 3, possibly, I'm not big on boundaries. I think boundaries clutter spaces. I think when they use planters to separate, it looked terrible just a couple of weeks ago there because of all the planters were set up. What might stop any kind of creep is maybe fixed tables. And I agree with Kathy, they shouldn't be the big, old institutional ones, right? But those things did speak to publicness, and somehow we could make it public by fixing the tables, not the chairs, and then maybe coming up with an umbrella that defines what public space is. But I'm having a hard time knowing what the project's about without a clear idea of how the walk works with elevation, about the drawings that show the lack of windows on the back, and without a table plan.
If I can help with just the architect I know was struggling with the elevation change. And when he designed this with Harbor Walk, he spent a lot of time, and he also spent time with the architect from Roses so that they could determine the elevation change between the existing deck on the south side and Roses so that we could make this Harbor Walk work and be within the ADA standards. Traditionally, what the city has done is always said, when a project gets approved, you have to meet the adjacent site. We don't get into the specifics that would be normally required during a building permit submittal for the elevation changes. We have to be able to work with that. And if we struggled with this issue when we were doing the House of Juju project. And it was very difficult because the rear door off of the patio and the ADA, and we had to be we actually had to shim up part of the Harbor Walk back there. So it took some design work, but we had to involve a structural engineer to be able to work on all of this stuff. And I think that it's not quite at the level for the Planning Commission to be asking for a project to bring in structural engineering designs to do this. Now,
well, that's where I guess I have to disagree, Kathy, because this is not just solving the elevation issue. This is how does the boardwalk work? How does it connect? When does it meet the retail floor that's there? So to sort of trivialize it down to a structural engineering issue is not the case. This is about the success of a boardwalk, I think.
And I totally get that. And then the House of Juju, we had the same issue. And then in the House of Juju, we ended up having to raise the interior flooring, and then there was a lot of work that needed to be done. But we had to do that during the building permit time. And what we're offering with this project at this point in time is we can definitely put a window in the back. We've got the side door on the north side proposed as the entry for the retail. And, if you would like some additional interpretive signs or something across the back, I'm sure the applicant is willing to consider that. But again, I don't think, respectfully, that we can try to solve this problem with the elevation changes at this point in time. I would ask that the planning, please, if you're concerned about it and you want something, as far as a table plan, if you recommend that the city council consider a table plan, we can put together a table plan. When we come to the city council, we can say that the planning commission recommended we do a table plan. Here's a table plan with 4 tables over here, and here's another one with 3, so that we can try to bring this project forward. I think that there's the applicant, again, has gone out of their way to bring a really good project to the city and an important and critical piece 10 to 12 years sooner than it needs to be. So we're trying to be able to provide this public benefit to the city sooner. So we're trying to create this retail space so that we can have some more. As Susan mentioned too about the gates on the across the driveway, and the trash cans are going to be there. So we can certainly, when the gates come down and the trash cans are exposed, now Roses did put some sort of aluminum facing on there to kind of make them look nicer, but we can work with Roses to try to beautify that trash can area a little bit and try to make that driveway area going back a little bit more pleasant and pleasing.
Susan, I guess in response to what Kathy just said, what I'd like the commission to at least consider is if we continue this for 2 weeks, I think within that time there could be a conceptual elevation plan that shows how you think it'll work. There could be a table plan that shows dimensions. And there could be a conceptual elevation, building elevation that shows what the glass might do, how to create a focal point, how to solve some of these issues. For us to send this to council without that consideration, I think is pushing the schedule of the project ahead of the importance of these issues. So I would, I guess, offer that, the commission at least consider that.
I've had my hand up.
You've had your hand up? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've had it up for a while, but I was where Bill was at, and I just want to reiterate to the applicant that our job is to make this project better. This is our only opportunity, and that's what I strive to do. I was more concerned about the street front. Bill brought up some outstanding issues about the waterfront, the back. So what I'm saying is we had this in front of us a month ago. This was held by the applicant, not us. So we have, what Bill is asking for is a simple continuance in order for us to have more information prior to moving it to council. Again, I think the other leaseholder stated that they would like to see at least some kind of table plan because it doesn't exist. And that's what I was pushing for. Let's see a little bit more detail. It says on the report on page 33, we have 461 square foot of public outdoor dining. Problem is we haven't defined it. It just says there's going to be 313 somewhere and there's going to be 148 somewhere else. Let's define it. I think that would at least address what the other leaseholder wanted to see, a little bit more definition. And I wanted that too. I mean, it's not going to, I think at the end of the day, break the project for me. I just agree with Bill, not only on the waterfront, but on the street front, because I think, again, we should make this project as good as we can make it prior to sending it to council. And I don't see the need to rush it. I just don't see the need to rush it. And if there is a need to rush it, then just, you have my ear.
Okay. Thanks, Mike. On the plans, the areas are defined where the seating would be in the front on the street side, the Embarcadero side of the building. So there are two triangles on sheet A1.3, shows the grade-in areas. As I said before, they kind of roughly correspond to the sort of pebbled surface in both spaces. And I do wonder if, for the sake of getting this project moving in a timely fashion so that construction can start in the season when we are having fewer tourists, that would be appropriate. Perhaps something the commission could do is identify how many tables, make a recommendation whether they be permanent. I think we do have some design ideas for the waterfront in existing plans and what things should look like. As far as the back of it, if the applicant is willing to consider window design, talk with staff about wharf preservation. I personally would be concerned about some safety issues going out on the wharf, but if that could be, I know not everybody feels that concerned about having railings and barriers and things like that around wharfs, because our T-piers certainly are open. But I always think about that, especially with young children. I just wonder if there's a way we could approach some of these issues and be able to move this project forward. I know the accessibility issues I was quite impressed with the way the ramps had been built up from Roses. I don't know how much further that connection needs to be made to get to the north side of the Dutchman's leasehold. But it seemed like it was pretty much there. I mean, and again, I tend to agree that the engineering is not something that we are tasked with doing. We are tasked with looking at whether the project benefits the community and is appropriate for the community it's serving, how we can help both applicants and the community achieve a mutually agreed upon benefit. So, I feel like, again, getting to complete this harbor walk 12 years ahead of schedule is a pretty big benefit to us. And I think with the materials they're using and the design they're using, I don't see a major inconsistency with any of that. I do respect what the other commissioners are saying about this. So, Bill, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Susan. I guess my hesitation is that the things that are missing are not small things. It's really not about accessibility. It's really not about structural issues. It's about the whole character of that walk in terms of how the transitions are made. For us to sit here tonight and try to design the tables and the layout, that makes me nervous. I think this stuff is too important. In all my years on the other commissions, I've really stayed away from that, trying to impose it. And I think a 2-week effort, especially after the delay that the applicant has asked for, is reasonable. And that way, I do think they have to take the comments of the Planning Commission seriously. And I want evidence that they are.
Yeah, and Susan, I just wanted to reiterate that what I meant by my comments is we have 313 feet here, we have 148 feet somewhere else, but we don't have a plan, a table plan. Excuse me, I should have used that terminology, but we've already talked about possibly taking some tables out, putting a different type in. So this is what I was looking for. So I agree with Bill that if we can send the best project up, I hate to leave things blank. That would I hear what you're saying. There are those shaded areas, but I don't feel the subleasee was comfortable with what was being proposed. And I feel that as well. Thank you.
Joe.
Yeah, this is for Kathy. My intention, Kathy, is not to put you on the spot, but I'd like to hear from you as to Bill's proposal. Could you in fact deliver something on the order of what he's suggesting in 2 weeks, or do you think that's not possible?
I can't totally answer that question, but I know that the architect unfortunately, he's moved and he's got another job. So this is the work that he's been trying to do recently for us, is he's trying to fit it into his sideline schedule. So it kind of puts us in a hard, difficult situation. So I can't guarantee that I can go to the architect and ask him to do some major revisions to the plans and be back to you, guaranteed and back to you in 2 weeks. Because the additional problem is that, it'd have to be done rapidly, because I'll need to give it to staff, and then staff will need to have time to do some review first and then come back to the planning commission. So to be on the safe side, I would say, we're probably looking at a month before we can come back to you with any kind of certainty of any kind for the plans. And then I know that everybody's been mentioning this, that we asked for the continuance last time. And that was done to try to work with the subtenants, the Dolphin Shirt Company, to redo the plans to take away any kind of concerns for any kind of interior remodel. So we did it to try to help out with this project and answer some concerns to start with. That's why we were continued. So additional continuations is only going to be hurtful for this project. And I understand, Bill, I understand what you're asking for. And what we're asking for is some latitude, and if we can work with staff and go to the council and then try to work in the meantime before we go to the council, try to work up some additional plans, work with staff, and try to get some of these questions answered. And I just don't know if the architect is going to be able to give you a definitive answer of how he can put a door on the Harbor Walk side and have the elevation change work with that. I think so it's putting us in a difficult spot to try to answer these questions for you tonight and get specifics. We're happy to address and try to do some other articulation on the back side of the building so that we can answer your concerns. The door on the side, if it's, rather than just putting the small doors there, we could try to put some other articulation. We're happy to look at all of that kind of thing. But again, holding up a project to try to get some more detailed plans. I'm sorry, I mean, maybe you're going to disagree, but respectfully, it's just a problem for us.
So could we get some response maybe from Scott or Cindy on timing of this? I don't know what our meeting looks like in 2 weeks. It may be full agenda already. What are your thoughts?
You certainly have availability, for either of the next two meetings. I do know that we had a couple of different conversations with Chris Parker, the project architect, who did work with Stephen Puglisi Architecture, who was the architect on the Roses Landing project, to address the connection between the two lease sites. And so he does, I think, probably think that the door they propose works. I don't know, making it larger and that type of thing, what impact that has. And certainly, Mr. Parker is now no longer located in Morro Bay and is in Idaho. So I would imagine, getting the turnaround in 2 weeks, like Kathy says, is probably unlikely. But who knows? Maybe you guys got a lot of pull, Kathy, and you can make that happen. I think we could make it come to either of the next two meetings. You just might not have a whole bunch of evaluation if Kathy gives it to us next Thursday or something, or when we'd have the staff report published. So that would be the issue.
Wow. Okay. Where do we want to go with this? I mean, I know where Bill wants to go or doesn't want to go.
Well, we could make a motion and then test it.
We could do that.
I'm willing to make that motion. I'm sorry, Kathy, I put you in a difficult spot, but I want to say you're putting the commission in a difficult spot. I'm very reluctant to approve a project of such significance with such gaps in information. So for me, I'm really happy to accommodate you any way we can, but I think the effort would be worthwhile. And I feel we would be missing our responsibility if we didn't ask. So I'm making the motion that we offer continuance of the project to the date that the applicant would prefer, And at that point, and I'd be willing, if there's any way we could help, to meet in between to move the project forward so that based on the comments that you've heard today, we can get certainty for the next meeting.
And I'll second that. This is Mike.
Thanks, Mike. Any discussion? Joe?
Yeah, I mean, this is a difficult issue for me. And I'm going to do what I sometimes do, which is apply what I call my stupid test, which is if we were to approve this now and then we were to discover that there was some oversight, we would have a difficult time explaining why we decided as we did and not took the time to become certain. So as much as I would be reluctant to delay this, I think given the issues presented, we probably have no choice. So I would favor the motion.
Okay.
Okay, so before we call the vote, so if we're continuing to a date certain, then I don't have to renotice. If we're continuing to date uncertain, I have to notice. So if we continue to the next meeting, I don't need to do anything. Or if we continue specifically to the meeting after that, I don't have to do anything. I'm not so much concerned about the meeting after that. I guess we would have time to do the noticing, and Kathy would have a much better idea probably after speaking with Chris Parker about when she could have plans. So maybe, it's not a huge issue, but if there is some idea that we would come back at the next meeting, we would need to continue this meeting to that meeting, because otherwise we would have had to put the notice in today.
So maybe, could I ask if we said we wanted to continue it to the next meeting, and then now this next week I talked to Chris and I find out there's absolutely no way that he could have everything done. If it's continued to your next meeting and it's on your agenda, if we're not ready, can we ask the Planning Commission to once again continue to another date certain to continue the noticing? Or because I'm kind of in a difficult position without Chris.
My preference would not be to continue to do that. My preference would be that you would know that you wouldn't have the plans, next week, and then we would know, so we could just notice the following meeting, whatever it would be. I'm fine if we continue to the next meeting. No, we don't. I would just do a one-pager back to the commission saying, look, they weren't able to get the plans for you, and it looks like we'll be, coming back at whatever the meeting date is. I think that probably works fine. It's not a big deal to have a one-pager and they're saying we couldn't bring it back, couldn't get the plans in time, that type of thing. So.
Because I would like to be able to have it as soon as possible if we're going to do this, but without having Chris on the phone asking what his schedule is like, it's kind of hard for me. So if the commission's okay with saying continue it to the next meeting, and then if after talking to Chris, then we can't do that, like Scott says, coming in with a one pager and saying we're not quite ready yet. Because we still need to go to the city council after you, so then we run up against holiday time, and so this could get delayed till December or January before we get to the city council, depending on their schedules too, please.
So Bill, would you amend your motion to a date certain?
So how would we have to say it, Scott? Because I'm fine with Kathy's flexibility.
Sorry to interrupt. You can continue it to the November 2nd Planning Commission meeting.
So I amend the motion to that, and then if Kathy needs to adjust that date, she can do that.
And the second accepts that. If Kathy accepts it.
Excuse me, Scott just said November 2nd. I think it would be October 5th.
Sorry, October 5th.
So I think we need to have another amendment to the motion.
I apologize for that.
I think Kathy just
Scott's really pushing time here.
Yeah, I apologize for that.
Go ahead, Bill, and then I'll second if you get it right. So
let me get the date right.
October 5th.
Yeah,
October 5th, with the flexibility that if Kathy needs to move it, that the commission is fine with that.
And the second accepts that.
All right, I guess Cindy, you would call the roll on this one?
Yes. Commissioner Roshan.
Yes.
Commissioner Rodriguez.
Yes.
Commissioner Graffia.
Yes.
Chairperson Stewart.
No.
Motion passes 3-1.
Thank you. All right, thanks for your discussion on all of this. And Kathy, we'll see you in 2 weeks.
That sounds great. Thank you very much for everything.
All right, thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
On to new business, the review of the public parking management study by Walker Consultants. We have Scott Graham, and I think we have Scott Collins, who's woken up now for last hour or two. Hi, Scott.
Susan, do you think we could take a 5-minute break?
Oh, that's a good idea. Or like 3 minutes at least, the 7-inning stretch, and then we promise we have your full attention.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
That one was that you showed me. I'm going to do it on. I was battery didn't charge it.
That's a good thing. Joe is back, Mike is back, so we can wake up the Scotts and Mr. Walker, and we are ready to go.
Well, there we go. Here comes Mr. Collins, our esteemed.
All right, thank you guys for your patience.
course, that was an interesting conversation. Glad I could listen in on that.
Yeah, we'll have a conversation afterwards, okay?
Yeah, Stefan learned a lot too about our city.
Yeah, I bet. All right, we'll let you take it away.
Sure thing. Okay, so we are here before you today to talk about our parking study that was conducted by Walker Consultants last year. As by way of background, before I turn it over to Stefan, because he's the real pro and expert in this field, City Council has made pursuit of creating a parking management plan a top priority since about 2017, and probably even beforehand. And the Harbor Advisory Board has been looking at parking probably more from the lens of a revenue generator for even prior to that, because of concerns about being able to fund needed infrastructure improvements, and we heard a bit about that in the previous discussion this evening. We hadn't been able to pursue a parking study for quite some time because of staffing challenges, and in fact, I wound up taking on this project myself because Mr. Graham is very busy, and he would be the likely holder of this or Public Works Director, but we didn't have that position for over a year. So I took this on, and we looked at several different firms and landed with Walker Consultants, given their experience in California and in coastal communities, that is, to conduct a comprehensive parking study of the core business areas in town, particularly the Embarcadero and downtown, as well as the Morro Rock parking area. So the purpose of the study is outlined in the study itself. I'm sure in the executive summary, I hope you all were able to read the entire summary, or the entire study that is, plus the summary. But ultimately, we want to understand what the current situation is on the ground. And we all know that there's a fluctuation in seasonality in our visitation, and understanding how that factors into our parking. So what our current demand is and how it's being used, well or not well, and what are some of the best ways to address our parking needs moving into the future. So there was an analysis done by Walker Consultants, and they came up with findings and some recommendations that they'll present to you in a few minutes. In general, the study found that we do have acute parking needs, particularly in the summer months, and particularly in the waterfront areas, and some of that could be addressed through a variety of parking management tools, including paid parking. So again, all that was attached, the study and the summary, to the staff report. So what we'll be looking for from this commission is just your input, really just to get your input about what you see with this study, kind of what you've observed in your time here in Morro Bay, any questions you may have about the study itself. And if you're so inclined to make recommendations to council, that's great. But if not, input is welcomed as well. The Harbor Advisory Board has provided some input. The Public Works Advisory Board has provided some input. And our goal is to take this to City Council sometime in October for them to take a crack at it. And we don't have necessarily a game plan about how that should go. It's just something that council has been desirous of having their hands on this data and recommendations from a bona fide parking consultant. So again, we'd be looking for either just general input or recommendations from this commission. And with that, I will turn it over to Stefan Turnoff, who is the principal with Walker Consultants. And I will actually share my screen, and then he will tell me when to advance the slide. So one moment, please.
Thank you, Scott, that the technology is not on me. So.
Yeah. This may not be a good decision for it to be on me, but we'll make it work. All right, let me go to the first page of this. Okay, can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
All right,
Yes.
take it away.
Yes.
All right, thank you very much, Scott. Thank you, Chair Stewart, members of the Planning Commission. Thank you for having us here. Working in parking and parking issues, we tend to work in nice places because those are the places that really attract a lot of people, a lot of cars, and have parking issues. I have spent a fair amount of time in Morro Bay. I'm based a little further south in Southern California. I'm Director of Planning for California for Walker. We are nationwide, and we do focus specifically on parking issues. But I do really enjoy going to Morro Bay. Last time was right before the pandemic. And again, I think, a lot of what we found will be somewhat intuitive for you. We've quantified a number of things, and we're interested in getting your feedback. So with that, I think we'll get started. Next slide, please. So we'll talk about the study area or areas. We really looked at three pretty different areas. The Embarcadero, as you would expect, downtown, farther inland, and then somewhat as an extension of the Embarcadero, we looked at the parking leading up to and around the rock. We're going to talk about the existing conditions that we counted, we quantified, and then some of the recommendations we had based on what we saw. Next slide, please. And next. So the study areas. The main one, and I think this is where we'll really focus today, is the Embarcadero. That's because that's really where we saw the issues. We did essentially perform the same counts, the same data collection in the downtown study area, and just cutting to the chase, didn't find severe parking issues, here and there, but overall ample capacity, although, certainly some parking demand clusters around higher demand locations, restaurants, cafes, things like that. But really, we're going to focus on the Embarcadero area and to some extent more rock. We looked downtown, public on-street and off-street. The off-street spaces are there to ease the pressure on the off-street, on the on-street. So we looked at both public and private, with the exception of the hotels. So we think we got a pretty good picture. And, parking always operates as a system, on-street and off-street, public and private. And, on-street, I just will add, when we look at these, different commercial parking areas, on-street parking is almost always the busiest, then public, off-street, and finally the private supply. And we'll talk about some of the things we saw compared to, some other cities and sort of how how we saw that works there. Next slide, please. So the data collection, we were fortunate enough, again, we appreciate being here, that we wanted to get the summer data, and we work in a lot of coastal communities, and sometimes paperwork or construction or something, we have trouble getting summer data, but we collected the summer, the beginning of August 2020. At that time, the pandemic had really been easing, and it was busy. People were out there, but your streets weren't closed. I think a parking lot here or there was closed, but we thought it was a good representation of a summer, typically busy summer week. Thursday is almost always the busiest weekday in communities, especially visitor-oriented communities, so we counted on Thursday, and then Saturday is typically the busiest weekend. Then we wanted to see off-season or shoulder season, so we went back again for what you could say is just more typical conditions in November, before Thanksgiving gets going, but the weather was nice, and really getting a sense of what's typical and then what's busy, and comparing the two. On-street counts, we count every 2 hours from 10 a.m. as some of the restaurant and other commercial employees are showing up, to 8 p.m. as the dinner crowd is winding down. Generally speaking, we know there can be exceptions. And on off-street, we count a little less, noon for the lunchtime, 2 p.m., some visitor parking during the day, and then 6 p.m. for restaurant. How long people park. And I was just saying to Scott, we have so much data, but the more I dig into it, very interesting data. How long people park, typically, a customer, 1 hour, 2 hours. We know you have visitors who love strolling up the Embarcadero. There are people who park longer there. But, if somebody's there 4 hours, 8 hours, many of those are going to be employees. And making sure that they make way for visitor parking is what we want to keep in mind, recognizing that the Embarcadero is an experience and people very often want to spend a lot of time there. Next slide, please. Let's see. So the existing conditions, in other words, are counts. Let's go into a little bit of detail there. So again, the Embarcadero, just over 1,100 spaces. About, what would we say, a third of those are on the street. You have a lot of on-street spaces. That's that's a high number, relatively speaking, but you have a lot of off-street also. Downtown, even more on-street spaces, not as many off-street. And then the area around the Rock, we'll show you what we included in that, just under 400 spaces. So that's your supply. That's the denominator when we do these calculations. Next slide, please. So summer weekday. Peak demand was lunchtime, not too surprisingly. Very often we see that if, for businesses, and maybe people even come in from, areas beyond the city, and of course you have your big visitor area. 67%, 2/3 of the spaces were utilized. The busiest areas, and we'll get to this is significant, between beach and marina. But 67% is a high number. I've been involved in probably 100 of these for smaller cities around California. And even in the really busy cities, really busy, typically we see about a 2/3 occupancy rate at peak. And then the issue is, well, we know there are some spaces available, but all the demand's concentrating in a certain area. I'll get back to that in a minute. Downtown, 47% of spaces were utilized. That's during the weekday. Some blocks were especially busy. You'll see the red areas. You'll see some red downtown along Morro Bay Boulevard. But then you compare it to the Embarcadero, and we have all the way going up basically to the stacks on some of the surface lots, down to Marina Street. It's pretty consistently busy. And I will say this, we're working with 3 other coastal communities right now, and as busy as they are, even summer, weekday is not that busy. It's their weekends. And in your case, your summer weekdays are really busy. Busier, I think, typically than I've seen in a coastal community. So with some coastal communities, when we look at paid parking or parking management, we're really looking at about 12 weekend days. They're really busy, but 12 weekend days a year. And in your case, your weekdays are also busy. So we're looking at pretty much solid, again, probably as you would expect, throughout the summer. Next, so let's get to the weekend, which is even busier. Next slide, please. So the weekend, up and down the Embarcadero, all combined, 86% of spaces utilized. That is a really high number. Again, we have perceptions and realities of busy places, but, taking a whole district, and the fact that your district is fairly locked in by the bluffs there, that people really concentrate all on the water, that's pretty exceptional. And of course, there are 15% of spaces, 14% are available. That's something, but we can see that the public is going to have some trouble finding spaces and very honestly, as coastal might look at it, accessing the coast. So the most highly utilized areas, public and parking all along the Embarcadero. The unpaved lot just south of the stacks did have some availability. That might account for that 86% not even being a lot higher. Downtown was busy also, a lot busier. 49%, I think we said during the week. This is now 72%. So we see it's still busy, but there is availability in downtown. So really, I think our report and much of this presentation, we move away from downtown because that's not the area of severe parking impacts, I'd say. Let's see, next slide, please, Scott. Thank you. So then the off season, summer's a quarter of the year, although we know that you have other times, warm fall days, the warm spring days when people come. But looking at what we could say is typical, or at least not summer. Again, lunchtime peak, weekday, 42% of the space was utilized. And so that's about mid-November. So a lot more availability. But, we do see on the map, here and there some red spaces or some red areas, red off-street where there are impacts. It's a little hard to find a space. Downtown, 38%. Again, it's that same stretch of Morro Bay Boulevard and some of the side streets get really busy. But overall, if you can walk a block downtown, it appears that there's generally parking spaces to be had. And like we said, lower utilization than summer. Next slide, please. Now, but we get to off-season weekend, And again, even, we recognize this is COVID and we've been counting cars everywhere. But we felt that, given the conditions, what we looked at, that this was pretty representative overall. And you can weigh in, you think was less busy, maybe more busy. But, a November weekend in that core area, I think from about, at least Harbor down to Pacific, but really going almost up to the stacks down to Pacific along the Embarcadero, you're busy. 67% of spaces utilized. Again, I was saying in many cities that were called out to with problems, that's their peak, and that's your November peak. So, it's busy out there. It's busy, all summer long, but we're also seeing that, nice weekends off season, you're pretty busy. Let's see, downtown 38% utilized. That's about the same as the weekday. So, again, downtown we can talk about that, but that's not what caught our eye in terms of, okay, there's some improvements that we can make. Next slide, please. The Rock. More Rock for the summer. We talked about, some of the access issues, the roadway, getting in and out, but ultimately parking is the terminal capacity for people driving there. You do have this big lot, as you know, the dirt lot around the Rock. And of course, it's all just spectacular there. But that's a big space. We estimated about the capacity, but really it was those little lots leading up there along the Embarcadero. And, weekday, not surprisingly, peak is lunchtime, but it's only about half full. Those little lots fill quite a bit more, but they're still not full. But then on the weekend, it's summertime, basically those little lots, we have to understand, you have all these spaces at the end, and then you have several lots. I think that side one we're talking is about 60 spaces. The others probably in the 20 spaces, but those fill, making it a little challenging for people to find parking. So it's, the Rock is somewhat of a different animal, but there are issues there. But as you would expect, the peaks and valleys are even more pronounced than in the Embarcadero. Next slide, please. So the Rock off season. This was interesting. The weekend, again, it was a nice day in November, but we see those little lots leading down, on the roadway to the Rock were all filled up essentially, but the dirt lot was pretty much filling. And what we see, as you expect, where were people parking the dirt lot? They park facing either the bay or the ocean. And then that central area is basically unparked a lot of the time. Off-season weekday, of course, it's lunchtime, but only a quarter of the spaces are full. That's across that whole study area. So really not much going on there. Not surprisingly, weekday in November in the off-season. Next slide, please. Let's see. How long do people park? And again, really, we did the analysis, and there's a lot to unpack here, but we're trying to figure out if you turn spaces more, are you providing more access? And what does that mean? And do you want to do that? What is the purpose of the parking space? So in the Embarcadero, the majority of people, the vast majority of cars were there 1 to 2 hours. By the way, there isn't parking enforcement or really signed parking restrictions along the Embarcadero that we saw. So it's not a question of people violating or not violating. It's, what were the behaviors? And the vast majority did park 1 to 2 hours. But the 10 to 15% of vehicles that were parked 4 to 8 hours or more ended up taking about a third of the spaces that we analyzed. Now, it's very labor intensive to look at a car and say, okay, how long has it been there? So we don't do the whole area, we do the busiest areas, but nonetheless, we were seeing the area, say the 100 or so cars, parking spot, I guess I should say, area that we analyzed, depending on the time, a quarter to a third of those spaces were occupied by people staying over 4 hours. Now, we can talk about who those cars belong to. We can talk about what the purpose of the parking spaces along the Embarcadero are. But we would have a concern that a lot of that was just maybe employee parking. It could be people going out fishing, going out on the water for a long period of time. But we would ask the question, you have restaurants down there, you have businesses down there. Some of those spaces, do you want them turning? And basically, for capacity's sake, for the most part, we would say yes. We do recognize the Embarcadero. It's a lovely and unique destination, and I really appreciated the conversation, the item that came up before, and I walked along the waterfront there. But nonetheless, I think our concern is, yes, people may stay a long time, visitors may stay a long time, but we do want some turnover of parking. We do want people who need to find a space to show up and have some turnover, and not have it dominated, for example, by simply the people who are working there or fishing there, showing up first and then maybe leaving their cars all day. That is a typical concern in a commercial district. That would be a concern here as well. So, and that's my long lead into this analysis. But let's see, next slide, please, Scott. Let's see, okay, I didn't go into those numbers too much, but I think that's the gist of it, is that a significant number of the spaces are being occupied by people parking there a very long time, and that is really, it's inefficient. We know it causes cruising for parking as people drive up and down the Embarcadero looking for spaces. That is, and it doesn't matter if people park for a long time if you have plenty of empty spaces, but once you don't, this is a significant issue, and that's what our eyes are on here. Key findings, again, I think I hit on all these, and most of these. Summer, lunchtime, the Embarcadero are all busy. Busiest area of the Embarcadero between beach and marina. A number of the lots, which I said before, lots typically fill last or aren't as busy. They were busy, very busy. And while most people are parking for 1 to 2 hours, those that park longer are taking an inordinate amount of spaces. So, and then finally, you're busy during summer, but what caught our eye was you're busy weekday and weekend, much more consistently than a number of coastal communities. Let's see, next slide. So some recommendations here. Again, the point of paid parking, and it was very interesting and productive discussion. When I first talked to the city manager, Scott, his question was, do we have an issue? Do we have an issue we need to manage? And that is always the discussion, the question. Paid parking doesn't work if you don't have a problem to begin with. And we're seeing you do have a problem, and revenue or not, I always want to make sure that we're saying this is not about the revenue. If it were solely about the revenue, the paid parking wouldn't work. So we always start looking at time limits, but time limits can be a pretty blunt instrument. They're worth considering, but time limits are typically, free parking for the first 2 hours, and then maybe, $50 for the third hour, if for whatever reason the car doesn't get moved. And that can be a pretty unpleasant experience for a visitor. So there's a customer service aspect to it. There's a flexibility aspect to it. We've recommended and actually worked on programs where time limits were relaxed or eliminated, but the paid parking went in. So people had the flexibility to stay longer, but they would have to pay. There was something that, basically we want a very deliberate, purposeful way of managing the parking. Time limits of 3 hours, which could be justified there, and we'd like your input on that on the Embarcadero. They can be hard to enforce, and in most communities you have something called the employee shuffle or the 2-hour dance, where people go out and they just move their cars. If you're there for a 6 or 8 hour shift, you move your car once or twice. The time limits don't do much good. Now, there's ways to enforce against that, but again, that gets to be a blunt instrument as well. So paid parking can be a lot simpler, a lot more straightforward, in many ways more fair. And then rather than something arbitrary, I know communities I visited with my family, often with parking problems, because that's where I tend to go. And, after 2 hours, we just say, well, time to move the car, we want to pick up, and we need to pick up and leave because we can't find another space. So again, the paid parking represents flexibility also, and all these are considerations. then finally the enforcement. Both need to be enforced. Time limits are more time intensive to enforce. You have to go around twice to a parked vehicle to see whether or not it's in compliance. Paid parking, you go around once. So that's really where we saw, there is justification, significant justification for looking at a paid parking program here. The last thing I'll say, I often get the question, when do we charge for parking? And typically my answer is when the frustration of finding a space is greater than the inconvenience or the issue with paying $1 or $2, or in some cases $3, depending on the community, for parking that parking space for an hour or so. So, and I think in where you are, along the Embarcadero, I would think for a lot of visitors, that inconvenience level is there, at least in the summer and much of the time. So that's how we arrived at, I think these recommendations here. Laurel Rock, and we can dig into this a little further. It is a destination. It's phenomenal. It takes my breath away when I go out there. I know putting a price tag on something like that, and we're not saying that, it can seem uncomfortable. On the other hand, it is a destination. It needs to be maintained. Demand on summer weekends, really does justify it. Other times, certainly on those little lots along the roadway, those are filling pretty consistently. But, we think that there's a way to do this without negatively impacting the experience. Typically paid parking is about reallocating demand, away from everybody clustering in one place and using some of the less utilized areas. So we think that there's justification to look at paid parking at Laurel Rock, maybe a little more seasonal. For all these things, the questions may be in the details, but we think that's worth looking at. Next slide, please. So I think I touched on most of these already. Benefits of actively managing parking and the parking regulations. We want the turnover, not everywhere, but in some places. I work primarily with engineers. I am a planner, but engineering, we always say so much about capacity. But in this case, we can increase capacity by increasing turns. We never want to force somebody out of a parking space, but we do want people to select where they park, in large part by how long they're going to be there. And by doing that, we can effectively increase capacity by having some spaces having more throughput, and then spaces that are a little farther out, whether it's for some visitors or employees, where they don't turn over, that can effectively get more people to provide them access to the coast. So again, make it easier for visitors. We work a lot with Coastal Commission. We want to be sensitive to what they need, but in many cases, these restrictions or paid parking programs really do improve access to the coast. And we work in a number of communities where there are no restrictions along the coast, and it's very challenging to find parking. And we would argue, and very often Coastal agrees, that does restrict the general public's access to the coast. So we do want to, looking at bring visitors, to shop and dine and recreate, just walking up and down the area. Certainly, a beautiful, worthwhile area to do that. But the vast majority of people are driving. And so we want to make that available to them. The last issue, I'll just bring a side note to that. We know when it comes to paid parking, that it's money, that we hear equity issues, and there are concerns about that. I think overall, what we've seen and the justification for that is, someone who's traveling to the coast, say a number of people in the family, maybe, an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, spending money on gas, spending their whole time, a day, a couple of days, the incremental cost of that space, those are the people, we always say, people traveling long distances, it's part of their vacations, it's part of their special time. the people living up on, in Morro Heights, and maybe some people want to do that, walk down and hike back. For them, maybe paid parking, maybe they'll choose a different mode. Maybe it's not worth it to them all the time. But, from an equity standpoint, the people for whom this vacation is a big deal, it provides them with a lot of convenience, and the relative cost of that compared to everything else they're doing to make that trip happen is pretty small. So, we always say if parking is a finite resource, which it generally is, we want the parking for the people who need it most. And the people with other options, ideally they take those options. And so again, I think, there are all these things to consider, a lot to consider, like I said. And I think that's, Scott, next slide. Oh, no, okay. Improve pedestrian access. Part of this is to make the area more walkable. Having the turnover there, I heard some of the conversation in the last item, and I heard, I think one of the commissioners, if I may say, this is one of our most valuable places here. Do we want? It's a policy decision. Do you want to turn the spaces more? To the extent that cars are sitting there a long time, is it about widening sidewalks, improve pedestrian access, parklets, outdoor space? But in general, I think when we charge for parking, things, start falling into place, and it's more conducive to a multimodal environment. So again, I know throwing a lot of things out at you here, but these are all considerations. The last one here, I think, maintain a free parking area. In the highest demand areas, we want paid parking. Ideally, and we've done this in a number of communities, make sure to have some free parking also. As I identified, we saw a lot of underutilized parking up by the stacks. Could some people who are parking for long periods of time, could they park up in some of those off-street lots to make way for people who are staying for a shorter time and for who, that access for just an hour or two is more important. Typically, we say the longer you stay, the farther it's acceptable to park if parking is a finite resource, which you do have here. Next slide, please. So downtown, maintain the existing 2-hour limits, enforce them. It's tricky. We like ambassador programs that do this in a diplomatic way. There are communities which will give you a warning ticket, maybe even a $10 citation, something along the lower end before you get a higher citation. California motor vehicle laws can make it a little hard to implement that, but we think it's possible. But we know enforcement, when you enforce, ultimately you don't want to write any citations, any tickets, you just want compliance. We think doing that, the demand is not high enough downtown to justify anything more than that, but we think some enforcement, especially along that Morro Bay Boulevard and maybe some of the side streets, could produce some meaningful improvements and results. Next slide, please. Okay, so I think we got it all in there. Very happy to answer any questions. I love this photo. I think this was one of our planners who was out there who took that. But yes, we really welcome your input here.
Thank you so much for that presentation. Let's see, Mike, I see your hand is up right from the block there.
Okay, I didn't get the gentleman's name that gave the report, so I'd like to refer to him as
that. Was Stefan Tura?
Stefan. Okay,
that's it. Thank you.
Stefan, question. I guess the beauty about coming from a place like the Bay Area and Silicon Valley, and having worked in San Francisco for 12 years of my life and taking the train and everything else I could get on to get there, there's some great ways to deal with what we're dealing with now. You talked about some of them, which is, I live around a mile away, and I've never driven my car to the Embarcadero because I live there. I go park there, and I walk there. So, we could have some some kind of, if you live there, if you're willing to walk, maybe the city can do some kudos type of things for walking there and having more availability for our residents, for the visitors, excuse me. And then another one would be, as you're coming to the city, then maybe designate a couple areas where people that are coming to Morro Bay know, well, if you want a quick, easy parking spot, go over here and then we'll take you to that rock. Stuff like that, or we'll take you downtown, the Embarcadero. So I'm just saying those kind of things work in San Francisco. Those kind of things work in Silicon Valley. What I'm saying is I don't see enough of a problem at this point. Maybe during the summer months, yes, but in general, I just think that thank you for giving us our report, but I'm just not feeling it at this point that it's necessary, because there's a lot of things we can do, a lot of tricks in our bag we can still pull out as a city, and I'm willing to be part of that process since I come from such a vibrant community, and so does another one of our planning commissioners that comes from Los Angeles. So, we've had to deal with parking just about every day of our lives, so there's ways to deal with it. That's just my feedback back to you. There's other ways that I feel we can deal with it before we go to paid parking, but paid parking is always an option. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Any other commissioners have some comments? Bill.
Stefan, thank you very much. That was really good. I guess I'm interested. One of the recommendations in the report is looking at more seasonal, maybe ways to implement this. And I'm looking for other ways that we could preference locals. Is there a way this becomes a tool to kind of show how much we want to make this work for tourists? I think most of us don't go down to the Embarcadero during the summer weekends. You can't get into the restaurants, etc. Is there a way that we could put together a policy that would preference locals? And then, I'm kind of on board Donald Shoup world, the real cost of free parking, or the high cost of free parking. That's a difficult lesson, but I think it's valid. So I'm also wondering, how do we preference the locals, and how do we explain this in a more open way to everyone?
Sorry, I was muted. I'll take a crack at that. And let's see, the preference of the locals, and I'm sorry, you had another question, I think, but the preference of the locals, and I'll take a crack at that, but I think your planners who work there every day also may have some new way in. Coastal Commission does not like the word preference. And it's just a whole other ballgame working in a coastal city and providing a preference, especially to locals who ostensibly really do have some of that access at their fingertips, so to speak.
Is there a different word?
There may be. But I would say this, we've gotten together and there are a few cities that have preferences. Many predate coastal, but I think we are as part of all this with the discussions. In fact, we've been looking at some communities which do effectively have something like annual passes, monthly passes. That in many ways it doesn't make sense for anybody who's a visitor 2, 3, 4 times a year. But if you live there, it may be worthwhile, and that's something I think in our discussions here we've been exploring that. Again, that type of thing does exist, and I'd say 4 coastal communities with parking that I can think of offhand. But you said something. This was the other thing that I remembered when you said, "Well, locals don't go down to the Embarcadero on a busy summer weekend anyway." And there's so many communities I can think of, small visitor destination communities where, you enjoy some of the restaurants or the sites, but when it's busy, you don't go there anyway. And I think, the timing when we would implement any of these restrictions would be during the busiest time. And so presumably, just for example, if we had paid parking, if locals aren't going down there anyway, not to generalize, but I know very well those communities, that charging a little bit may allow locals the access to go down there when they say, I'll never find a parking space right there, on Saturday, and they're right. So it's that part frees up, makes it more equal access for everyone. And so I think it's worth keeping that in mind, because it is about access, and we're only charging for parking where access is so severely curtailed that people aren't going or people can't go. So.
And just real quick, is there a way to explain this? I mean, your presentation was good. I think we all got it. But this is a complicated issue. I think a lot of folks think that parking is a right.
Right. The fact that parking is a right, again, getting back to, the idea, this is your very special, valuable public space. It's just as much of a public space as a sidewalk in many ways, and in many ways just as much as a right-of-way, but it's serving far fewer people as a parking space and serving even fewer when those cars sit. This was an overall presentation. There's so many analogies or metaphors we use. One thing, when I'm in restaurant communities, and I talk to restaurateurs, they stay in business by turning tables. It's very similar. You want that table, you want the experience, you want the food, but, it would kill them if you stayed there for 4, 5, 6 hours. It's very interesting. A few years ago, we worked, and I know yours is a very different community, but we worked in Santa Monica, and even with the promenade shops and restaurants, the beach, the pier, and the movie theaters, I believe the typical length of stay was just under 2.5 hours. So people, I know even when do I spend a long time in the Embarcadero? Typically when I've walked from somewhere else. When do I spend a short time when I've driven? It's a specific restaurant. So I would say, I'm not doing a good job of answering your question, but the turnover is important. The public access is important. The public space is important. And when we don't, it becomes a free-for-all or first come, first serve if we don't try to make it public for all. And I think that's the concern. At least we want to be deliberate and purposeful in this. And then the other thing is, these are people coming to your community, and some of them may just be walking up and down the street, and we're not trying to, make it hard or extract revenue, but, that this is the cost of them, it's a visit, it's something. Here's the thing, it's an option to pay, and like I said, you pay when it's worth it to you, and if it's not worth it to you, you park somewhere else. But I think people really are, happy to park at a destination or to pay at a destination if it provides them access. You're getting something for your money.
Bill and Stefan, I would add to that. I sit on the Government Affairs Committee, and we've had a lot of discussions about this and reviews of your report and analysis. And one of the things that really hit home, and Bill, I think this would be one of those public arguments, is that free parking is not free. So it's the issues of street repairs and sidewalk repairs and lighting and cleanliness and picking up the trash. All of that is an expense, and that, the paid parking and, again, that rotation of customers and so on helps to pay for the upkeep of all of the spaces that are public spaces. So
yeah, that's Donald Shoup's book, The High Cost of Free Parking, right? And that there is a cost. But Stefan, thank you very much. I thought your presentation was great. Thanks.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you for having us.
Joe, you had your hand up.
Likewise, I thought it was really thought-provoking. Thank you. I think that's just great. A couple of questions. Your dynamic parking, how dynamic can it be? Meaning, could you actually program, or someone could program weekends, Friday night, half a day, Saturday, Sunday, spring and summer? And if you can make it that dynamic, and the rest of the time it's not charge. And if you can make it that dynamic, how do you explain that? Or can you easily explain that to visitors who come to the town?
That is a key part of the issue, is we want it to be understandable for the public. So I think typically we don't want it that dynamic. We want it very easily understood by the public. When you talk about programming, well, first of all, there is, I will say Coastal Commission will have something to say about rates, but at the same time, you want them pretty consistent and understandable. So I think what we would want is something straightforward, higher rates, summer weekends and or summer, really making it simple. It has to be understood. We don't want people scratching their heads, as they're making their decisions or deciding, what to pay. So I think, 2 to 3 stratum at most, we could say, busy season, shoulder season, low season, weekday or weekend, mid-afternoon, to the extent that you're concerned, about locals, or, we've heard about, whether it's surfers or people just accessing the water, do you start pretty late in the morning? But overall, I think simplicity is really important. And there's always the temptation to really fine-tune a rate, but I think, we would really emphasize the simplicity.
You mentioned, part of, in quotes, the problem is employees or longer time uses like kayaking and boating. Is there an alternative way to address that other than parking? I'm just wondering, are you aware of any?
Are you talking about other than paid parking or the restrictions?
Yeah. I mean, I know you can have employers talk to employees, right, but I can't imagine them doing a very good job of policing their employees, wanting to.
I mean, I've been in so many situations, so many anecdotes where, I mean, very honestly, I can tell you public meetings where, somebody stands up and says, can't we just use the honor system? And you can have most people operating honorably, so to speak. Whereas if just a few, a fraction of parkers, for whatever reason, often very well-meaning, are not following those rules, that, that it doesn't work, that you lose access to those spaces, right? Because you and I and everybody here, well, let's say all of you, observe the rules, and I say, oh, well, let me just go out in front, and, I leave my car, and, I didn't get a ticket, or I didn't pay, and I come back and I do that. I remember being in a meeting in a small community in Northern California, lovely community. We all sat around bemoaning that, the issues and the honor system. And, we were right downtown, right on the plaza. And then, this was like an all-day affair. And then the head of the Chamber of Commerce, walks out, and they're parked right out in front. And, the other people, complaining that's parked right out in front. And this happens everywhere. It's human nature. And, so the short answer to my long answer to your question is no. I don't know, because ideally, like I said, you never write a ticket, but this is a very valuable resource, right? It's a fairly significant chunk of coastal California, and the fact that you pave it over to put a car in there doesn't make it less valuable or less in demand. It makes it more in demand. So you need a mechanism by which to allocate, like I said before, the finite resource. Again, it's the honor system. If businesses really crack down, that's terrific, but that has to be consistent, incredibly consistent. And often, we've seen the threat of businesses, let's say even letting go employees, as horrible as that sounds. I've seen that. But, businesses don't want to do that. Employees don't, want to be subject to that, especially, say, in an area where seasonal, help is challenging to find. So, again, it gets back to how blunt an instrument, or can we just pay, incrementally, little by little, and manage this thing? Things tend to fall into place when we do that.
Okay. And then the last question, given the law of unintended consequences, I imagine we should start with if and when we ever do this, we should start with a prototype, a small area. You visited and are now familiar with Morro Bay. Any recommendations as to the scale and where we should first locate our trial system?
Well, in the report, and it's deep in the report, I think we look, I mean, the core and the busiest area is the place to start. And again, you have a pretty big area. There is a natural boundary. In some respects, I think the threat of spillover is not as great there, but I think, and I can look at the map, we said an area, was it beach? Was it Pacific down to Marina? The city of Ventura did this a few years ago. It was very interesting. I think, and they've stuck with it. They did 100 spaces, and the whole rest of their area is free. I think that would be meaningful there, although you could justify quite a bit more. So it's sort of like, do you want to, make a real effort, to do this? But I think a pilot of, and Scott, let's see, I have a map somewhere here. I mean, essentially, the areas that consistently stay red is, I'm looking, I think from about Harbor down to Marina, and again, there are a lot of things to consider. Some of these surface lots further north, they are consistently red. But I think, starting small, there is some benefit to that.
Yeah, thank you.
I have a couple thoughts. I know there was a business some years back who saw the parking problems and purchased a lot for his staff. And that was an interesting thought to me. And I wondered about some of the empty lots we have around town and whether that would be something. I mean, we have businesses that some of them require a lot of staff. Restaurants need a lot of staff. Where do those people park? And they're, getting out late at night and having to walk in the dark to wherever they park. Those kinds of things can become an issue. So, I think that's not for you to decide, but the business community needs to think about, what resources they have, how they protect their employees, that sort of thing. Another thought, and it's interesting to me that Morro Bay is so much busier than many other coastal communities, even in off seasons and off days. And I see the potential for even more of that. I think it's a very attractive community for a lot of reasons, but I also think we have the potential for a lot more development and businesses coming in that are going to bring a lot of people. I see, although there's a lot of spaces in the downtown area, for example, that are vacant, some of them are in the process of being filled by some potentially very successful and attractive businesses. So to me, it's important to plan for success, because if you don't plan for success, you're going to be failing when that success comes. So I like the idea of a proactive look at parking and strategies for that and paying for it. I have a business in the downtown area on one of those blocks that does turn red at times. I think the birds and the trees are a good deterrent to parking for a long time in some of those areas, because people come out and are pretty horrified at what happens to their cars. But some of my fellow business owners will not be happy with me when I say I would have been fine with having parking meters, for example, on Morro Bay Boulevard and even Main Street, just to see that turnover again, because I hear people park, haul out all of their stuff that they're going to take down to the waterfront for the rest of the day and leave their cars there. So that's an interesting thing that does happen. But the other sort of simple solution there, because I think enforcement is hard, every so often people do read the very faded signs and say, gosh, can I only park here for 2 hours? And Scott, don't listen, but I do tell them, there's no code enforcement here. Go ahead and park. But even making those signs more legible, freshened up, put in places where trees aren't blocking them, that just put up new signage is probably a whole lot cheaper than code enforcement. So new 2-hour parking signs in the downtown would go a very long way towards helping that, because actually people do read them when they can. So,
may I respond just to a couple of those?
Absolutely, yes.
Thank you. And again, I know it's late. I don't want to keep you too long. I guess working backwards, it's interesting. The parking meter was invented by a department store for the purpose of turning the spaces in front on the street in front of it. This was not an invention of city government. This was invented for all the reasons that we're talking about. For the businesses, and we've seen businesses really, in some cases, advocate for paid parking. Like you said, you don't want people parking there just so they'll access the coast. That's not the place to do it. The issue with the new signs or the signage versus enforcement could be the people who regularly will park for a long time. Now, the people accessing the coast may be one thing, but the employees will know about whether the enforcement means business or not. The visitors might say, maybe the visitor to your store, to the neighboring business might say, 2 hours, I better get out of here after this. But so that could be a concern. Just a thought. Now, the employee lots, I also wanted to get to very briefly. If you can provide, an employee lot or something like that for your employees, that's wonderful. If it's not right next to your business, getting them to use it is another story. Mm-hmm. So many, public and private parking, the landscape is littered with parking that, we have 100 spaces or 20 spaces or 10 spaces over there. But, so the numbers look okay, but, if you or I, or we work over here and we can park over here, that's where we'll go. The issue of employee security, following up on that, what we'd like to see is if there's paid parking, and this gets back to the, talking about access, pedestrians, bicycles, can some of the revenue from paid parking go to, in the case of employee lots, a walk service? Not only good lighting, but if you have ambassadors and people enforcing, can you say, okay, my wait staff are walking out at midnight, and here's, John who walks the street, occasionally gets a parking citation, but he's going to walk, these two wait staff home, or not home, but just to the parking lot. That's all you need. The nice thing is there is revenue, and you can further the policy goals with the revenue. And so, that's I think what it does become a system, and we would like to see something like that.
Nice. Thank you. Anybody else have any comments? Mr. Collins, would you like to see any more direction from us, or?
No, but this has been fantastic, but I don't know if you took public comment. I hate to be this stickler.
Oh, gosh, you're right. We need to open for public comment. Well, we've just been asking questions.
Correct.
All right. Anthony, do we have any public comment on this item?
Thank you, Chair. I do not see any raised hands in the queue.
Thank you so much. And my apologies to the public if you were waiting and gave up. Do we have anything more on this then? Scott Graham?
I think it's like Mike has his hand raised, but this has been really helpful.
Oh, there it is. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, thanks, Mike.
Hey, Scott, I just want to say thank you very much, for getting, this report to us. Again, I think that, I'm not against, parking with meters or paid parking. Totally not against it, and I actually support it. But I think that there's much more we can do. And this is a seasonal issue, so maybe, we can get creative. But I just want to thank you for getting that report and getting us the information. I think it's valuable. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike.
Thanks, Mike. And Joe, your hand is up.
Yeah, I have one more question. I look to the day when the Embarcadero really becomes a true pedestrian destination, and we widen the sidewalk considerably, and maybe it's a one-way thoroughfare. And I don't know if you can answer this, but if we were, say, to make the investment in the infrastructure, so we had these sort of electronic parking devices all the way up and down the Embarcadero, would that be prohibitive then in terms of remodeling the Embarcadero? I mean, or would there be? Is the technology such that it's not a big deal to pick up a box and move it when we have to make all these remodelings to the street?
I think it would depend on a lot of factors. I think, I'm not the engineer in terms of moving the infrastructure. It's not always easy. I think it's doable. But one thing we're looking to more and more is, their payment by app, which I find, all my colleagues use it. I still find it a little complicated, but we're seeing now some payment by cell, by text. So the point being is that the trend is moving away from the hardware and the infrastructure. For a number of reasons, we're probably not going to get rid of it. But even these days, it's not necessarily a meter every single space. It can be a kiosk. It can even just be a few kiosks, maybe with a little, grace period, so you can walk half a block. But then, most of the transaction might be done on an app or pay by cell with signage. My point being that you can minimize some of that infrastructure. Probably not eliminate it, but minimize it. Compared to the larger things like, street lights and things like this, I think this is relatively small.
Great, thanks.
Well,
okay, anything else? Scott?
No, but thank you, the four of you. Fantastic conversation and input. We appreciate it. And Stefan, thank you so much for sticking around for this presentation. I learned a lot with the previous item. I'm sure you did too. And we picked up a lot of good input from this commission. So thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
All
Thank
right.
you for having us.
Thank to both of you.
Thank you all. Have a good night.
See you soon. On to item D, unfinished business, Planning Commission Development Review Subcommittee update. Mr. Graham.
Don't have a whole lot to update from last time. Still trying to get a date together with my subcommittee members so we can talk about next steps. We'll probably get that squared away here, maybe next week or something. But where we're at on the other side of things, we are continuing to move forward with the upgrades to our just got the login information for DigiPlan, so we're going to start testing the online plan check software. And I think I mentioned before, in a previous meeting, that we moved our CityWorks to CityWorks Online, which is hosted now on Amazon Web Services. It allows us a lot more flexibility. We just changed our contract with CityWorks to add some APIs. Those are things that allow us to connect other applications to it. So it's all seamless and runs together. And so we're just now starting the testing phase for DigiPlan. So hopefully within the next couple of months, we'll have that implemented, staff trained, and that type of thing. That's kind of the timeline for that. The next phase of it is really to form the stakeholder group with assistance from the subcommittee, and really kind of work on some of the front end stuff, the interactions that customers have with us, and look at our processes and timelines. And we're also having one of the consultant help us with again, I mentioned this before, but making the customer service portal more friendly, and so it has the steps to walk you through it, and we're testing that out right now too. So,
okay,
yeah,
thank you. D2, Planning Commission Public Benefit Subcommittee update. We have an update on that.
So we did. It sounds like they've been doing some work. I actually got an email from Sean Green, who's assisting the subcommittee, with some information today that I haven't had a chance to look at yet. I don't know if either Joe or Mike, have more to add to that. Maybe they do.
No, at this point, we're just going to go ahead and probably present something in October. So that's kind of what Sean said in his email. So that's fine. We'll just go ahead and present in October.
Okay. Joe, anything to add to that?
No.
Okay. I did have some communication from a resident who was interested in this. So I encouraged her, if she had any ideas on public benefit, to go ahead and forward them, I guess, to you, Scott, so that you could share it with
yeah, perfect. Yeah, happy to.
And again, for any commissioner or the public to go ahead and if you have thoughts, I think the more ideas we have about public benefits and the way to facilitate them and the reasons for them and all that, could just add to the mix and be interesting. But do forward that to Scott so he can make the proper distribution. Mike, your hand's up.
Yeah, and Susan, like I said, and our council liaison is, is supporting us in our subcommittee work. So I just wanted to throw that out there, that he's very supportive, and I think we have a lot of work to do, in various areas. So I think that if we have another subcommittee pop up, don't be surprised. And then I just want to ask Scott a question real quick. Scott Graham?
Yep.
Yeah, Scott, you got to give me the answer to this. How can you get your boss to do your work for you? Me and you're going to have to give me the ingredients for that one.
Yeah, that was a good one. We owed it to council to start the effort, and I was already doing general plan, local coastal program, and zoning code updates, and my hands were full, and we were looking around the room, and it was he or I, and so he said, "All right, well, I'll start it." I was like, okay. I thought it was. I really thought I was going to end up being the one having to lead the charge. I've done this before when I was in Pismo, so it wasn't.
Yeah. I just want to say congratulations.
So, Mike, the answer is you just be super, super busy.
Yeah.
Okay. Planning Commissioner comments and future agenda items. Bill, there had been a little brief email between you and I and Jeff about the potential to putting together a subcommittee looking at trees and working with Public Works, perhaps. And Jeff responded, that we could make a motion to do that.
Yeah, I think it sounds great. So I'd be happy to make that motion, Susan.
Okay. And is that something, Scott, we're doing under Planning Commissioner comments and future agenda items, or?
Interesting. Certainly, you can form the subcommittee and start talking about it. But realistically, this is something that you forwarded to the City Council for consideration of the goals. So the subcommittee formation might be a bit premature at this point. City Council directs our work. Appreciate our council liaison, Councilmember Heller, but wouldn't want to get too far out in front of that.
Let me revise my motion then.
Well, and just to chime in, you guys, the public benefits subcommittee, we do consider trees a public benefit. So we will have that in our report in October. So we will be addressing trees.
Okay. That's good.
Thank you.
So, Bill?
I guess, I don't know if it even needs a motion, or maybe it does. We make a motion to request the ability to form a joint ad hoc group, including the PWAB from council.
I would second that.
Thank you.
Any other discussion on that? No? All in favor? Do we need to call the roll on that one?
You can do all in favor. That's fine.
Okay. All in favor? Aye. Mike, you're...
Aye.
Okay. Excellent. So we're all interested in that.
Yes, we're all interested. Yeah.
Okay. Good enough. All right. Moving on to any other Planning Commissioner comments, future agenda items? No? We're good. Community Development Director comments.
And one of the things I wanted to touch on was Senate Bill 9 was signed by the governor on September 16th. That's you've probably heard, does away with single-family zoning. In many respects, that's true, although we are in a coastal city, so that we do end up with a little more discretion here. Also more information to provide you all on this. Happy to provide you copies of the bill if you don't have it, and some of the synopsis information on that maybe later on this week, so you have something you can take a look at it, because it's coming down the pike, and we're going to be
I'd like that, Scott, if you could get that to all of us. I think
I would like to see that.
Yeah, we've been talking about it, for the last 2 days, because he signed it on the 16th. It's been on his desk for a little while, but I think he was waiting to the outcome of the recall before he went through the bill signing process. I get a lot of bills on his desk that he was waiting to sign, so I'll get that out to you this week. Other item I had was Commissioner Rodriguez. You would talk about the minutes and the formation of the subcommittee that you and Commissioner Graffi are on for the public benefits.
Yeah,
the minutes, and that was in the May 18th minutes.
Wow.
I was sort of wondering, was it maybe that you looked at it and you wanted more information in it? Was that it? Maybe I just misunderstood what you were saying.
Put it this way, that was my first meeting as a planning commissioner, so I didn't come in with the intention of creating a subcommittee on my first meeting, but if it happened on May 18th, that's fine with me, just as long as it's reflected. Because it appeared that maybe the council liaison Heller wasn't aware that we had created that committee. So that's all. I just wanted some more clarity.
Okay.
Because that was actually my first meeting. That was my first meeting as a planning commissioner, and I actually wanted to get Bill's impressions, only because he was a prior planning commissioner as well, to see if that would be a beneficial committee to create. Right, Bill? Remember that one?
Well, we were impressed enough with you, Mike, that we just slapped you right to work there.
Oh gosh, you got
to be careful,
Yeah, I'm just following in Scott Graham's footsteps there. I guess I'm busy all the time. Okay, good. And his boss, by the way,
Yeah.
I don't have anything
Thanks,
other than those 2 items.
Thanks, Scott. Thank you.
All right, then I think we are ready to adjourn to our next meeting on October 5th, not November, at 6 p.m. via teleconference. Once again, everybody stay healthy and have a good couple of weeks. Thank you all.
I think this was an important meeting, Susan. Thank you.
Yes.
That was good work tonight, you guys.
All right, thanks guys.
See you later. Bye.
Bye.